Thank you for watching Fireside. If you enjoyed this podcast, consider liking and subscribing to be notified when future episodes release. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to another episode of Fireside. With me today is a Fireside regular, someone known for not gaming as much as they are one chunkin' in the faraway corners of Gielinor, a returning guest with a mission to discuss an issue that both of us are extremely passionate about, skilling in old school RuneScape. Welcome back, Josh Isn't Gaming, to Fireside.
Thank you. Thank you. Excited to be here. This conversation has been a long time in the making.
Yes.
We've
Oh my
talked
god.
about talking about smithing for like months.
Yeah, we have, and there have been a lot of plans going into it, and I think I'm still pushing for those plans. I don't want to spoil them for our audience, but there's a lot of back end
hmm
plans here that hopefully will come into fruition later on down the line.
Yeah. So that, in a way, we're thinking of this as like a part one. Maybe we'll
Yes.
see, but that's sort of how we're imagining it.
That's the intent of this conversation. And just to introduce our viewers to what this conversation will be focused about, if you can't tell by the title, it's mainly just a conversation about what I think both of us believe to be one of the more like problematic skills in old school. And while I'm sure there are people out there that, consider a ton of different skills problematic, from agility to, I don't know, maybe hunter if you're like me, but
Fire making.
fire making is a great one as well. I think both of us see smithing as not just a problematic skill, but a skill that has a lot of like intrinsic fantasy associated with it. So it would be the one that is most like easy to immediately kind of like address and imagine a solution for. Like, what does an agility rework look like? No fucking idea, frankly. But what does a
Yeah.
smithing rework look like? I think we all have an idea of what that might be, and that's part of the conversation here. But as I want to quickly point out, our goal here isn't just to pitch ideas into the ether. It's just to outline, potential, like kind of give a conversation as to why a rework of a skill, something as drastic as that, might be fitting for a game like Old School. Do you agree with that, Josh?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like we've all seen different pitches here and there. If you kind of keep your eye on the scene of people talking about solutions, a lot of them have been pitched. A lot of them are good. A lot of them are bad. People talk about things all the time. If you're a RuneScape podcast listener, I feel like Sebe, it comes up every other podcast. Like, we should just change it to be this. Like, that would be so easy. And uh, I think our goal here is, like you said, to just kind of like gather those options and like look at them and have an honest conversation about like which of these are doable. You know, how do they fit into the parameters of how a somewhat major skill rework could actually look.
Yeah, 100. Yeah, that's a great way to summarize it. And I know that you kind of had a conversation on one of Sebe's shows about smithing and just like the necessity of a rework. I think you're arguing in favor of that, and I would love to hear just a quick summary, I guess, from you of why you think it's a necessity or something that is worth doing in old school.
Yeah, so if you are listening to this, there's a good chance you also listened to that conversation I had with Sebe and some other people in that call, where I kind of talked about kind of like the history of smithing, where it came from, kind of like why we have the weird system that we do right now. Which, just for anyone who's totally out of the loop, I feel like maybe it's worth mentioning. Sort of like the core issue, or at least the most glaring issue is just to sort of put that out there, level 1 smithing, you're making a bronze dagger, and level 99 smithing, you're making a rune plate body, and that all of the sort of generic metal items stretch from those two levels. And so you end up with really weird stuff that doesn't make any sense in terms of like game progression, with mithril items, which are very early game, ending up in like the late 60s, which is quite a grind. And then even more ridiculous, you have adamant, which is like almost even less important than mithril somehow, sort of the way through progression works, ending up in like the 70s and 80s, which is just like, what? It makes no sense. And then obviously rune being in the 90s is just like, it's so far beyond any level of reasonable. I don't think there's anybody out there who genuinely can look at that and say that's a reasonable way this should be for this game. I don't really think that's anybody's take. I mean, do you?
Yeah, no, 100% not. And what you touch on there is something that I guess, noticed as someone part of the OSS community now, if people can consider me that, and someone who's been kind of an outsider and looking in at the way people talk about things, the way the community reacts to certain ideas. And I think that what you outlined there is a very interesting example. I don't know, I don't have a word for it, but it's something I noticed when it comes to skilling in the game. Because to me, skilling in OSRS and in RuneScape as an IP is the most identifiable and important feature of the game. Like without the 24 skills in the game, you would not have RuneScape. You would have a game that might resemble it, but you wouldn't have the bones that are RuneScape. They are the most crucial element of the game, and yet they are an element that I feel has been neglected in a huge way, And it's an interesting conversation to discuss why, and I think we can do that for a moment. But more than that, I think that I want to like dispel the idea that we only have to be concerned about power creep insofar as like a PVM reward. Oh, the new mega rare. Oh, the new end game item. Blah 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 blah. What does it devalue? What doesn't it? And that's an important conversation to have. I didn't mean to dismiss that, but it's frustrating when that's the only conversation we have about being conservative about what items to include and not include. When smithing to me, and just skills in general, a lot of them, not just smithing, have been neglected and left by the wayside, with maybe a quality of life change here or a patchwork addition there, for the better part of 2 decades. Like smithing functionally has been power crapped since before 2007. It's been power crapped since 2005. And yet it doesn't feel like there's as much passion to discuss that, because it's like a standard now. It's a precedent that we don't want to change because it is somehow emblematic of the game, or the notion of old school. And I feel like that doesn't fit the narrative that we have about how we're gung ho about PVM stuff, but not as gung ho about skilling stuff. I don't know if that makes any sense, but like I just wish that.
Yeah, no, totally,
Yeah, yeah.
totally.
Yeah, we have the same kind of way to have a conversation about PVM as we do about, or sorry, about skilling as we do about PVM. And what you outlined, the reason I brought that up is that idea that it has been an unchanging paradigm for over 2 years or 2 decades, way over, like 20, almost 26 years now. Smithing has been in a version of RuneScape, and it has seen very few changes. And you are more versed than I am on the history. Is that correct? Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, do we want to jump in real quick now we've kind of talked a little bit about, where we're at right now and get a little bit of this background?
Yeah, please do. Please, please. And also, I'm sorry if you hear my cat meowing. He is absolutely freaking out.
I can't hear it, but maybe it's on your side. I don't know. So, yeah. So I have these notes here. I read these off, like I said, in another video, another podcast. So I'm just hopefully this still makes sense to me. I'm just gonna read these off, but basically, yeah. So like you said, smithing has been in the game largely unchanged since the earliest version of RuneScape, which we call RuneScape Classic, which I didn't play RuneScape Classic, but for some reason I have this like obsession with RuneScape Classic, like it's some sort of like prehistoric time that's like just so interesting to me, and how everything was different, and especially just like different contextually more so than like different literally, as you'll see, because in so many ways smithing has not changed since RuneScape Classic. Um, so yeah, the original smithing system, you mine ores, you smelt them into bars, you smith them into equipment, existed exactly as you are familiar with it in RuneScape Classic. And here's one big difference that just kind of goes to show, one of the reasons why it doesn't make sense now, but it made sense then. And there's lots of these. So one of them is that I always bring up, which is that a lot of players don't know that there was no stat in the game called weapon speed in RuneScape Classic. Have I already told you that? I feel like I probably already told you that.
I believe you mentioned it, yeah, but you can
Yeah.
mention it to the
Okay.
viewers, yeah.
Yeah. Just again, there was no weapon speed. So, in old school, you have 3-tick weapons, 4-tick weapons, and you got fast, slow, and they tend to sort of scale their power based on that. And in old school, typically for like a melee weapon that you might make with smithing, the fastest you're going to get is 4-tick, and that 4-tick weapon is better across the board than any weapon of the same metal tier that's slower. Just like period. There's just no reason to use a slower weapon in old school of any of the metal tiers. You always just want like a scimitar, which is 4 tick with high strength bonus. But like I was saying, in RuneScape Classic, there was no weapon speed, so everything attacked at the same speed. So the strength bonuses, or the offensive bonuses of your weapons, actually just literally scaled as you went down the smithing tree. So like level 1, you have a dagger. Level 2, you have a mace and then a sword, and each one of these then a scimitar, and eventually you get down to like a warhammer and a battle axe, and eventually a two-handed sword, and they all attack the same speed, which meant that as you went up, your weapon was just getting stronger. And so a two-handed weapon was the most highest offensive weapon of any metal tier. So a rune two-hander in RuneScape Classic was the strongest weapon, like it just had the most, and then a battle axe was the strongest weapon if you wanted to hold a shield. So, you had to make a decision there at the end of the tree. But otherwise, you just kind of like progressively got stronger and stronger as you leveled up your smithing. So right away, automatically, we have something in RuneScape Classic and the original vision of smithing that we have lost at this point. Where if you get a smithing level, chances are you get something stronger than what you had before, assuming you were just smithing. So right away, that's some context that has been completely lost in the transition over to old school. Usually you smith like if you for some weird reason you're smithing your own gear, you like smith a scimitar like a couple levels into the metal, and then everything else just kind of sucks. And you're like, okay, well, I guess I'm just gonna level this up because I have to level it up. So that's just a starter, but the smithing as a whole, from where it came from in its original vision, was just completely different, right? So it played a very big role in the economy of RuneScape Classic. So an example I always give for context is, have you ever wondered why when you do a quest like Sheep Shearer or like Goblin Diplomacy, or even something like Black Knight's Fortress, great example. That is a quest that's relatively involved, for an early game quest. And the only thing you get out of it at the end is some quest points and like 2K or something, like 2,000, maybe 3,000 coins. And these days, that's just like basically like, a fart in the wind. You're like, okay, whatever. Like that's nothing. Like you look at it and you don't see anything. But back in the day, like that was real money. That was actually very difficult to get. That was a very real reward, because the things you could do for money in RuneScape Classic when smithing was added to the game were very, very limited. There was no thieving. Okay, so you could kill like low-level monsters, goblins and men, or whatever. They drop like 2, 5, 10 coins at a time. Like that was kind of like the default sort of like baseline of how you would make money. You could chop and sell logs, maybe, but when RuneScape Classic dropped, there was only regular trees. There was no willows and maples and yews or whatever. So you're just chopping trees and just selling the logs. There was no fletching. Fletching was added later. Or if you really wanted to make money, you could do smithing. Smithing was like the money skill. So as you're leveling up your smithing, not only are you making more powerful weapons, like, a scimitar goes up to like a two-handed sword, but the value of your bars is also going up. So, like how in old school, like alching, the alch price of a plate body is just higher than other things like per bar. Basically, you're getting more value. So as you level up smithing, you're getting better gear every single level, and you're getting better value for your bars every level. So every single level is like playing into something. And think about like some classic moneymakers are like selling steel plate bodies or whatever. If a steel plate body sells for like a little over 1K, that's like very much real money. That's like you had to work for that in RuneScape Classic. So this was a very sort of structural part of the economy of the game. And so it made sense at the time that it was very slow to level, very tedious. There was a lot of work, a lot of mining, to balance it so that it was, the appropriate speed and effort. Another thing you can think about is when RuneScape Classic launched, there was no banks. Okay. A lot of people don't know that. There were no banks. There was eventually added banks, and then you could only hold coins in the bank at, kind of like real banks where you give them your money and not like your fish or whatever. And so you're going to the mine, you're mining your ores, you're walking them to the furnace, you're smelting them at the furnace, then you're walking to the anvil and you're smithing them at the anvil. And that's what you had to do to make money. So the idea of leveling up smithing so that that time is more valuable had a real genuine role in the game. Also, for a lot of items, especially later game items, smithing was like the only way to get those items. Like for a while, because rune wasn't even in the game at first. But like to get, when it was added, to get like a rune two hand or whatever, like some of these more powerful items, rune, I don't know, kite shield or full helm or something, nothing dropped it. You couldn't just go buy it at a store. You had to have somebody smith it. So it made sense to sort of really gatekeep these items. Also, somebody told me one time that the jump from adamant to rune is like very disproportionate in terms of stats, especially compared to something from like rune to dragon. With dragon is actually only just like a little bit better than rune, but like rune is like twice as good as addy. That was because rune was meant to be like the end game. So yeah, it made total sense at the time when it was added that it has sat at the absolute highest level, and if you wanted the absolute strongest weapon in the game, you had to either smith it yourself or find someone who could smith it, and obviously then you could, if you're that person who's putting that time, then you could charge a lot for those. It was like a limitation on the supply of these super powerful weapons. So
100%, yeah.
That was sort of like the origin of smithing, right? It made total sense. It had a place in the game. But okay. So going back to my notes here, I have another good point, which is that there were so many things also around. Like I said, the no banks. There was only one world, so like if you're trying to sell your things to the store, you would get a pretty bad price for it. So you're trying to sell it to other players. There also like if you wanted to alking smithing items is very common these days. Nobody had the magic level to cast alchemy because magic was incredibly hard to train. Runes were super rare. There was no rune crafting. Nature runes were incredibly rare. So no one was alking. And basically, so many things about this system were completely different compared to the old school that we know now. I mean, basically everything described is almost laughable. It's like no banks, like that's insane. Oh, no high alchemy, like that's insane. No drops for rune items, like that's insane. And you're right. Compared to the game we're playing right now, it's incredibly different. So then why hasn't smithing changed at all? Literally all of the prices, the XP rates, the bar costs, the stats of the items have copied over one for one from RuneScape Classic, from that system I just described, to 2026, the year we were recording this in. It's all exactly the same. It's all exactly the same. It's unchanged. And how can we look at that and not see why that it needs to change, right? That it needs to, that is a problem for us to fix. I think some people would look at it and be like, oh, that's so like, classic or nostalgic or whatever. But it's clear that it doesn't fit in the game we're playing. And we just kind of let it kind of get grandfathered in this far. So that's kind of my spiel on the history of smithing and why we are in the situation that we're in right now.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think the viewers do too. That context is very helpful. I also want to add on like maybe more of like a philosophical angle to it for a moment, where oftentimes I think psychologically anyway, we default to like appealing to a level of like antiquity, nostalgia, whatever it might be, right? Like, oh, it's classic, it's OG, that's why we keep it. We have to keep those elements of the game. But personally, I think that the elements that we are like appealing to there should not be literal. They should be like conceptual. Like we are appealing to the conceptual element of the original intent of smithing, the way its
Right.
role existed in the economy, the way its role existed in your account's
Mm-hmm.
progression. We can't just appeal to the systems when you are not interfacing with those systems the way you used to, right? Like if you're like, oh, keep it old school, but you're not doing smithing like you did it back in 2001 or 2005 even, right? Like you're not interfacing with it in an old school way. So keeping it old school is essentially just is keeping it irrelevant, is keeping it, funnily enough or ironically enough, different or separate from the way it was at old school, right? Like sometimes, there's this thing we have to do from like a design standpoint, from a game design standpoint, where we have to adapt something to be more relevant or modern, quote unquote. But in doing so, we make it more old school, right? We design it with an intent to feel
Hmm.
old school while still modernizing it to actually be used, right? Right now, smithing in old school right
Yeah.
now, I guess my point is, isn't old school because no one's doing it in the way they did it in the old school way, right? Like it is a
Right. Right.
completely irrelevant thing, and the only things that are being done with smithing are, funnily enough, not old school. Giants Foundry is not old school, it's a completely new update, and that's mainly the way people do smithing, or they just run gold bars at blast furnace, right? These are the two paradigms
Yeah.
for smithing now, or just maybe repair an item they added to the game every year or two.
I mean, I feel like what one thing you're saying there is what is more old school than something than playing old school, right? Like to play the video game as in to interact with the, systems of the video game of old school is that is more old school than it just existing but nobody using it. I mean, right, is that kind of part of what you're saying?
Exactly. Like it can't just be, you can't just like, or I guess you can, but I'm saying like it's not productive, I guess, to just appeal to a system as being old school when no one's interfacing with that system in an old school way or in any way. It's completely irrelevant. That's why I always advocate for a potential like adjustments to the Calphite Queen, because back in the day, the Calphite
Hmm.
Queen was a boss you'd go in with a group and try to kill and get the amazing new dragon chain body. Today, it's a fight no one does until like the end game where you can solo it via like, breaking its pathing and stuff. And even then, it's a pain in the ass. Like, you can say, oh, keep it OG, but I feel like the issue is that it's not OG. You're not doing it in any way that is OG. Nothing about it is original. It's all been, deconstructed by our modern mentalities. And if we want to keep it old school, we should adjust it to be in line with the original intent of the fight. And again, we don't have to make this about the Calphite Queen. I know a lot of people have their own opinions about that, and that's totally fine. But like, if to me, in my fictitious theory-wise world, an OG version of the Calphite Queen would be a rework to turn it into a group boss, because that's the original intent of the Calphite Queen, would be a group boss people do, a difficult, challenging group boss. But that's beside the point. But that's essentially what I'm saying. Like we have to align intent with function, and right now smithing has almost no function that isn't just a modern addition. So we have to align the original intent, I think, with its current function
Sure.
or lack thereof.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, I think one thing that you're also getting at that maybe some people would take issue with is like, okay, you don't have to fix everything that is broken because it's outdated, which that's fine. I
Yeah,
think
that's
in a
fine.
magical world where we had infinite time, we could sort of modernize everything so that it, like you were saying, has this old school feel. It makes you feel the way it was supposed to when it was, in its conception, but has a place in the game. But you're right. We don't need to fix every single thing that exists in that realm. But I would like to argue that one of the skills that you are forced to interact with that's not only a core, component of RuneScape, but also just a core component of the genre of fantasy games, sort of like maybe one of like the first things you think about, if you're like, hey, like, give me a fantasy setting. It's like, well, yeah, you got like wizards and knights and archers and, you're like people smithing armor. Like that I genuinely feel like that would be like, in the top 5 things.
Yeah.
And it makes sense, right? It explains why, and this is kind of getting into how, what is it that we really want to fix about this? Why so many new players? It's such a classic thing for someone to start playing RuneScape. They never played before. They're a brand new player. They go through Tutorial Island. Tutorial Island tells you to your face in words. It spells it out. It says, hey, here's how you smith. They make it pretty fun on Tutorial Island. You mine some ores right next to a furnace. You put in the furnace and you put it on an anvil. And you're like, damn, this is kind of sick. I can make my own gear. Like, yeah, I'm gonna try this. This is pretty fun. I honestly feel like it's one of the more compelling things on Tutorial Island. And then you get to the game. You're like, yeah, I'm gonna make my own gear. And then immediately either someone tells you, you're not, because you will suffer because of this the levels that it takes to do this, or you start doing it and realize how long it's going to take you, and you just immediately feel the sense of just complete betrayal. The game was like, yeah, you can smith your own armor. Like it's pretty fun. Like you do mining, you're leveling things up, you're making money, whatever. And then it's like, actually, you're not. You're not gonna do that. It's just go figure it out some other way. That's how you Google it, like, oh, should I, you're a new player, like, should I make my own armor? And then you go on and it's just like, no, 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 never, never. It's a horrible idea. And to me, and to some other people as well, that's just a fundamental issue, right? It is breaking a promise that the game gives you, both literally, it tells you can do it, and also just conceptually. From a fantasy game, you should be able to smith your own gear. I don't think that's too much to ask.
Yeah, it's a fundamental problem with just like also like golden pathing, right? Like in an onboarding experience, right? Like you teach someone one thing and then they immediately get taught or realize, I guess, if they continue playing, that it's a completely incorrect thing that you're teaching them during your tutorial. It's total troll. Like you are actually, inting yourself if you choose to go down the smithing your own gear path. Not only because it's unoptimal. That's not the thing I'm trying to say. It's not only not optimal, it's also just like fundamentally an irrelevant element of the game. Like it is something that will never be useful for you ever. And then that to me is such a it's such a, as you pointed out, kind of a betrayal of game design in a way where like so many elements of RuneScape, probably arguably my favorite element of RuneScape, tie into each other, right? How skills influence other skills, how your activity in one area influences your activity in another, and how all those things cross-pollinate with one another. It's the coolest part of the game. It's the most like interesting from a design standpoint. And smithing exists on its own island, totally disconnected from the rest of the game, right? Your ability to make adamant armor at 86 smithing has no tangibility anywhere. It doesn't make you good money. It doesn't make you good. It doesn't give you good XP. It's not quick XP. It's not fun because the adamant rocks take 97 years to respawn. Like it's a horrible experience to and fro, right? Like top to bottom. And a new player, I think 99% of them, I guess, would be immediately disconnected from the game if this is the kind of gameplay loop that they are interested in participating in. And as you pointed out, being a blacksmithing your own stuff is like the core fantasy of a fantasy game. Like I can't think of a single fantasy game that doesn't have blacksmithing or a version of it in it, right? Like it's such a classic element of the fantasy genre, to the point where all my friends who recently started playing RuneScape or started a year or two ago always talk to me about how much they wish they could make their own armor. That's such a core element of the game.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that people will longtime players will be like, guys, there's no need for this. People, even if you change it, people won't smith their own armor. And this is maybe just my opinion, but I genuinely believe that those people are wrong. I genuinely believe that even if it is more efficient to go buy your own armor, people will still do it because it fulfills a fantasy, an RPG fantasy. It feels good to make your own gear. And that's not even just for Iron Man. Obviously, it will be a thing that if you did make it more accessible, Iron Man would obviously do. But I think even mains, I mean, people will tell me I'm crazy for saying that. I genuinely believe that people start playing the game, they just want to do that. They want to play the game. And that's one thing they want to do. And they will do it if it's a reasonable ask. Even if it's a decently long, I think they'll still do it.
Yeah, I think we have to separate like the 15th account Andy, like making their 9th hardcore Iron Man and their like efficient hunter route for an Amulet of Glory versus like a first time player and where they go, right? Foe is not going to be baited into making a full steel armor set when he makes his next hardcore Iron Man with the farmers, right? Like
Right.
but a new player might be, right? For sure. And I think that
Right.
in this case, creating a level of like alignment between expectation and execution is important, right? Like the idea that the efficient way to get the Amulet of Glory, this is kind of off topic, but the efficient way to get the Amulet of Glory is to do your hunter grind, right? As an example, right? And that's an interesting notion, right? Being efficient through the hunter skill to obtain something that's useful for your combat and your transportation and whatever it might be. But similarly, I look at that and go, that's awesome. You can do two skills at the same time and get a good output from that. But I wish that they also made a crafting route for that too, right? Like I wish that it didn't wasn't 80
Hmm.
crafting for a glory, which is similarly to smithing, an outdated requirement for an item that you're going to be far outscaled by the time you're 80 crafting, but
Right.
not replacing the hunter route, right? Just creating in tandem a separate path to take. And that's always been my attitude about smithing too, right? Like if you want to go fight fire giants for a rune simi, that's a cool skip you could do. I fully support that and I would love for that to stay in the game, but you should also have other routes to do. Like that's the most fun part about RuneScape, right? Setting up a goal and finding all the different ways to achieve that in your own, personal way. That's always been such a foundational element of the game, I think, right?
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. No, 100% agree. And I feel like one thing that you mentioned a little bit ago that I'm still thinking about as we're talking about all this is this idea that if a player comes into the game, they're new. And by the way, if you're a listener, you will find that my perspective very much tends to lean towards the new player for numerous reasons, but largely because new players are the future of the game. And you kind of have to cater to them uh, because you want the game to keep growing. I think if we only cater to returning players, it will slowly dwindle. If we continue to cater to newer players, it will continue to grow. I think we all can agree that it growing is better than it dwindling. But one thing you said was if they come into the game, they get this idea in their mind from fantasy RPGs and from RuneScape telling them that they can smith their own gear. They go in for it. They experience the unfun systems of smithing and how slow it is and how far away the goals are and how impossible it all seems. Not only are they like, wow, fuck this, I'm not going to smith my gear. They're also going to say, wow, if everything's like this, I don't know this game is for me. And I think it is a very rude awakening very quickly. Because again, it's so common. I wouldn't even bring it up if it wasn't so common for people to start the game and they get off Tutorial Island and they kill like 5 goblins and like, oh, I need to be stronger. And the first thing they think of is, I'm going to smith my own gear. And so it's literally like essentially the first impression of that sort of gameplay, what you're talking about, of going in, you have a goal, you want to find your way to it. How do you do that? And their first thought is like as wrong as it could possibly be. That is not a good player experience. That's not going to encourage someone to keep playing the game and keep trying that loop, which, like you are correct in saying, is the most fun loop of the game.
Yeah, I think that, to return to golden pathing for a moment, that's always been a concern I had. It's something that I outlined in like one of my older videos about the new player experience of the game, and how like the idea of the sandboxy elements of RuneScape is not just to have you enter a world, be confused, then quit. It's the idea that you are taught the different routes and then you choose the routes that to take. Like that to me is the most aligning feature of what a great sandbox game can do, right? If you are clueless, you will never get a clue if the game doesn't help you get that clue. Give people, I think I said in the video, like give people the tools, the letters of the alphabet, and then have them learn how to write their own words. But if they don't know what the letters even are, how are they ever going to progress? And in this case, for the smithing example, we are giving them the letters of a completely different alphabet, the acrylic one, or Cyrillic, sorry, and expecting them to write English words. It just makes no fucking sense. It's a total
Yeah.
bait, right? And I am so and that's I guess the roundabout thing that we're saying here is we want people to feel confident and excited about exploring the depths of the game, and that just simply can't happen if we're sending them down the wrong paths. And that's another feature of the Calphite Queen, which for as much as I'm not like, it's the most important thing to change the Calphite Queen, I totally respect people that want to keep it
Theory
the way
wise,
it is.
hate
Yeah.
Calphite Queen.
Next to Calphite Queen, I guess. But like, it is frustrating, I guess, where if a new player were to look at the wiki and might not just watch guides all day and go, oh yeah, the level makes sense, it's a lower level boss as compared to the other ones that I've killed like Scurious. Of course I'll go to the Calphite Queen, and then boom boom boom, you get 3-shot and bye bye, right? Like it's a very, regardless, I wanna continue this conversation by actually pushing it in a complete opposite direction. It's something
I need to speak on that for 1 second,
yeah,
which is
please,
imagine
please.
you go to
Yeah.
Scurious, you're doing the like prayer switches. It's shooting little lightning bolts at you. It's shooting little weird things at you. And you're like, yeah, I'm ready for KQ. You go in. It's doing literally the exact same thing. The animations
Oh yeah.
look the same. And you're trying to do your prayer switches and it's not working because that's not how it works. That is actually egregious now that you mentioned that, given that they are more or less the same boss, but one makes sense and one fucking sucks because it spawns little ads and shit. It's the same boss. And one works how you think and one doesn't. All right, sorry.
No. That's exactly what
Rant
I mean.
over.
I mean, that's a whole like, of on hit versus on animation. It's something that I was
Right.
incredibly passionate
But you
about
can't
originally.
even,
Yeah.
like Jad flick KQ in any way. It's just impossible. It doesn't work.
Yeah. It's totally
So
random. Yeah. It's totally random.
totally random.
And it always hits through prayer. And
Okay.
yeah.
It's such a great boss. Okay,
Yeah.
it always hits through defense. That's what it always hits through.
Yeah, yes. It always hits the
Um,
defense. You're right. Yeah. It's 100% accuracy is, I guess, is the correct way to
100%
say it.
accuracy.
Yeah, so if the KQ splashes on you, that just means because it rolled a 0. Like it can't actually splash on you, right? So yeah, it's a very interesting fight. So the reason I bring all that up is because a common like conversation starter or continuer when it comes to the smithing rework is obviously looking at our sister game RuneScape 3 and discussing its take on smithing and mining. And for those that don't know or have never played RuneScape, the third, they completely reworked the skill. I think it was in 2018, 2019, they completely reworked mining and smithing, which technically is kind of what you have to do because the two skills are so, inextricably bonded to one another. But they did a whole big rework, like a sweeping one, to the point where the skills are operatively different. And for those that aren't aware, I recently started a group, Iron Man in RuneScape 3 with my buddy who I played old school RuneScape with still, and after maxing in OSRS, I was like, you know what? I promised like a year ago that I would check out RS3 if they change the stuff that I outlined in one of my videos about it, and lo and behold, they have. So I'm like, okay, let's give it a shot. Let's see how it is, and it's been an incredibly interesting experience that I'm sure I'll make a video about down the line, but one of the biggest like immediate like what the hell is happening is mining and smithing in those games. And I want to yap just for a second just to quickly give as brief a summary as I can about the way they function in RuneScape 3 as opposed to old school RuneScape, because I'm sure a lot of people are aware how mining and smithing works or work in OSRS, but might not be aware about how they work in RS3. So the very quick kind of summary about it is the first thing they did is they removed all weapon and armor drops from core metals, so bronze to rune, from every drop table in the game. So bosses and creatures and fire giants no longer drop their associated items of those metals. So rune scimitars, rune plate bodies, whatever might be. You don't get those drops anymore. Instead, you get these things called salvage, which are essentially like the alternative to that. They are these just kind of like differently sized versions of the core metals that are used for alching and other stuff. So essentially, it's a very like quick solution to like, okay, we want people to craft their own stuff. So we want to make sure that we're funneling them down that route rather than just giving them items from fire giants. Quick aside, I don't like this change, but that's what they did. And the reason they did that is because they obviously had to consider the economic impacts of fully retiering the core metals. Bronze to rune now goes 1 through 50 rather than 1 through 99. That was the second really big change they made. And the third one being they added new core metals between level 60 and 90. So you have armors at level 60, at level 70, at level 80, and at level 90. And as you might have guessed from that, you now progress through the armor progression system from level 1 to level 90, and the armor you get is generally speaking tank armor, which means that it's defense heavy. It's not like going to give you more damage like a fighter's torso would, right? And the final thing, and this is likely the crux of the conversation, is that the methodology of mining and smithing has changed too, like the way you train these skills. You still go and swing your pickaxe at a rock, but now rocks no longer deplete, so you don't have to wait for a respawn timer on your iron or, God forbid, your rune. Now you just kind of have the rock, and it's permanently giving you the output of that rock: iron, rune, coal, gold, whatever it might be. And it never depletes, and instead it's operating on a damage system. So each pickaxe has its own set of like damage it can deal with a critical strike chance, which is kind of fun. And when it comes to like the amount of damage it deals, that's related to the hardness of the rock. So the more end game a rock is, so rune as compared to bronze is harder to mine, and therefore you upgrade your pickaxes alongside your other armor to mine that rock faster. Smithing, on the other hand, is now a more of a, I guess, expansive experience where you create your bars as you would always in the smelter in the forge, and then you melt those bars down and create armor with them. Now it operates on a different system where like you have like a melted down bar that you combine into like different armors. So like a rune plate body would take 5 bars, combine it into one like smelted bar that you smith, and the smithing experience is generally more AFK now. You don't just make like 50 pieces of the same armor over the course of like 2 minutes. Now you just mainly work and forge one piece of armor for more experience, and that way it kind of like balances out. Like you're not making like a billion pieces of the same item that you like vendor or alk or whatever. And you can reinforce that armor through adding more bars to it. It's a whole different thing. We can get into that later. But the point is that the methodology through which you do the skills is a bit different because it's more meticulously tiered. Now, that's good and bad, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But that's the most obvious, like, well, look how this other version of our game did it. Should we do the same thing? And now with that quick summary, I'm curious, Josh, like, what are you familiar with this system? Are you aware of it? Do you want it implemented? Which elements are most interesting to you? Which elements do you feel like might be better left on the side? Like, I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So whenever I bring up smithing, because it's something I talk about every now and then in my videos or whatever, people will basically every single time bring up the RS3 smithing rework. The biggest positive for me is that they did it at all.
Yeah.
That there is something to look at, that smithing has been reworked, and that the game didn't implode. Like it seems better. I don't think it's perfect, but it seems better. I think that from that whole thing, what it really makes me want to kind of drill down into is what, for old school, the things that we really want a smithing rework to do and the things we really want a smithing rework to not do. Because there's a handful of things that jump out to me in that rework that I think, for me personally, I think for a lot of players we would really not like to see. And a big part of it, I think this is sort of, as we were talking about, like preserving the feeling of old school without it being the literal systems of old school. So, for example, item drops turning into this salvage stuff. I think that people would really be against that, and I personally would be against that. I think it really changes the texture of the game, where something drops like a rune medhelm. There's something about that feels like it's immersive, right? And being like, oh yeah, I don't know, all these monsters are carrying around like some scraps of rune in their pocket for some weird reason. Like that doesn't.
Yeah,
I think it would take something away from the texture of the game.
I want to add some quick context there if possible, because I agree with you. First of all, I do like the idea that monsters drop items, specifically with, obviously monsters still drop items in the game, but like for the core metals specifically, this is what changed. But I agree with you that it's a lot more fun if you have different routes to achieve those items, right? I don't want to just have to do smithing for a rune scimitar. I also kind of want to go kill a fire giant for it, or buy it from a vendor if I have the gold. Like, these different routes are quintessential sandbox. Removing one of them, I think, is the wrong thing to do. But I think the core reason why this was done, outside of just funneling people down into their rework, which is obviously something they considered, it's the secondary economic element of it. And I think this is the part genuinely that is the hardest to solve for. Like, it's very easy. I think it would be incredibly easy to just re-tier the smithing in OSRS. Like, what do we do with the last 49 levels? Who knows? But going rune to level 50, that would just make sense. Whatever. But the economic impact of that is a lot more interesting and difficult to consider, because rune, as we know, alks for example, the plate body, I think was at 34k, 36k. Being able to craft 36k alks at level 50 would be insane. I think that would just be completely break the game, especially if we increase the speed at which you mine rune rocks. But if we re-tier smithing, rune rocks would be as more popular, so mining them would be incredibly frustrating to anyone, because all of them would be always depleted from people hopping worlds and focusing on that, because of the amount of money that would exist within this level 50 version of the skill. So it's like, so there's this issue that I think they rubbed up on during the design process of like, well, we don't want to ruin alch values for everything, but we also can't retain the alch values for the armors. So we're going to lower the alch value of Rune now that it's level 50. I think in RS3 it alchs for like 9k for plate body or like 6k for plate body rather than 36k. But we want to keep the alch values on the creatures because that's a source of income, right? So the salvage, the rune salvage, actually still the big one, the one that's supposed to represent the scimitar or a plate body, still alchs for the same amount it did back before the rework. So that's a way for them to keep values on monsters static while changing the values based on the retiering process that they did in the mining and smithing rework. Which again, not thrilled by the result, but I am sympathetic to that decision because yeah, that is a very challenging thing to do with a retiering of any kind because God knows who is who is currently hoarding thousands of rune plate bodies that would have their bank value decrease by 50x if
Totally.
a retiering happens.
I'm doing so. One of the thought experiments I've always wanted to do is what would happen if we just genuinely just change it right now. So we may have jumped ahead a little bit, but
Yeah.
for people who maybe aren't caught up with this discussion, one of the big conversation topics is just taking all of the levels of those smithing, the core metal items from bronze, iron, steel, all the way up to rune, and putting them into a much more relevant level range closer to the combat levels that you can equip them at. So instead of steel starting at 30, steel starts at like 5 or 10 when you can equip it. Same deal. Mithril is around 20 or rune is around 40, 50. And the immediate, like you said, the immediate response is, well, that would tank the economy. And I really I've always wanted to do a little thought experiment about what it would actually do. And so I want to maybe do a little like on the fly math to put into a real situation what it would look like, just because I'm very curious. So one thing I always bring up is, so like you said, sorry, the mining would need to get changed also. So I always say like, let's just super easy solution, right? We're sort of like at the lowest hanging fruit here. Let's just sort of turn mining into wood cutting. Let's just say that they function about the same. That sound like a good sort of starting
Yeah.
place?
Yep. So and just to clarify what you mean is that now nodes don't immediately deplete when you gather something. They just have a chance of depleting after a certain amount of gathers. Or in woodcutting's case in OSRS, it's just a set number of times. So 3 minutes for a rune rock, 2 minutes for a mithril, whatever it might be.
Right. And let's say that the success rates are like loosely similar in terms of like chopping a tree. Like let's just put this again, this is very low hanging fruit just for sort of simplicity's sake. Like rune is around like a yew tree. Does that sound like a fair?
Yeah.
People would be like roughly on board with that. Right now I'm trying to figure out how many like willow trees you could cut per hour. Because I imagine maybe, let's say coal is around like a willow tree chop rate. I don't know if that's about right, but that just seems like an okay starting place.
Sure.
So let me just see if I can find this. Basically, I'm trying to say, okay, if we took all of that, so you can chop about 200 yew trees, yew logs an hour. But you also need to kind of split that with the coal cost. Coal's a whole own other thing. But let's just do this real quick to sorry, I'm Googling on the side to get like a very loose sense of okay, so at 30 you can cut about 700 willow trees an hour. Let's just call it 1,000, okay? So that's that 5 to 1. So in 2 hours you can make 200 rune bars, okay? So you can make 100 rune bars an hour. Divide that by 5 for plate bodies, 20, and multiply that by 34k or whatever. So you're looking at like a 700k XP per hour or GP per hour rune plate body smithing. If we just kind of use those loose, numbers, if you're just straight up, you just make a new account, you mine stuff, and then you smith it, you're getting about 700k an hour. Would that break the economy? I don't really know. It doesn't sound like that would be as disastrous as people would make it sound like. What do you think?
I wouldn't say it would break the economy. I don't want to take too drastic of a stance here. I think that it could potentially, and not even could. I think it would kind of break the, at least from an Iron Man perspective, the I guess necessity for ever needing gold again, right? If you're making 700k an ounce an
Mhm.
hour, just like kind of AFK mining, like you would be chopping logs. I think that at level 50, that would be pretty, I think, damning to just like the Iron Man progression route, just as an example of like,
Sure.
because yeah, I mean, gold is hard to come by initially. I think Giants Foundry is the core like method of getting gold originally, or an early game Iron Man, but now you could just do semi
Mhm.
AFK smithing rune and just immediately get all that kind of 700k an hour. You do it for 10 hours, you're 7 million gold, your miscellaneous stack. I feel like that would potentially take away from Iron Man a progression. For main, 700k an hour probably isn't the end of the world, really. Like, but it's worth noting that all of this income here is alk value income, so it's just a full gold influx into the economy. It's not like it's
Right.
not a
Right.
trading of gold. It's a complete just flush of gold, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Mhm.
It's an influx of gold rather than a trading of gold, which
Yes.
means that
Yes.
Jagex would probably need to start like deleting gold from the Grand Exchange more. I feel like it's not going to destroy anything, but it would definitely maybe have a negative effect on the integrity of the Iron Man game mode progression pacing wise, because it would just
Mhm.
be objectively the correct thing to do when you start an Iron Man just rush the infinite gold rune method. So I think in with that in mind, I actually do think about this a lot as well. I don't like the immediate solution proposed or created in RS3, but I still do believe that rune should have its alk value lowered, at least baseline, if the retiering happens. So bouncing on, and I know we're a bit into theory crafting here, but
Interesting. Interesting.
I would love to hear
Yeah.
your thoughts on my kind of the solution I kind of quickly thought of a couple weeks back when I was thinking about this problem. Are you open to that?
Sure. Sure.
Okay, cool.
So just to be clear,
Yeah,
I just want to make sure
mm,
to reiterate one more time the current issue we are trying to solve is the thing we've outlined at the beginning, which is we want players to be able to access this experience of crafting these items much earlier into the game, but we don't want to have these runoff effects on the economy and especially the Iron Man economy.
yes, exactly. Like we want to make sure that the Iron Man progression, especially the gold economy for Iron Man, is still kind of sparse initially, so you don't just have to rush smithing and immediately solve that for the rest of your accounts. I feel maybe I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure 700k flat alks an hour is would be the best Iron Man moneymaker in the game right now. I could be off. I think CG is lower. I think CG is the alk machine, but is I think that's only like 250k alks an hour, maybe like 450k if you're really lucky with Dragon Alberts. This would just be like insane for a level 50 method. Like it would be insane in my opinion. So that alone, I obviously some people hate Iron Man, but they are like 30% of the player base. So, and it's worth considering like their progression path, considering so many people
Wait,
love the
sorry, I
game
just
mode.
realized I'm going to throw one more thing on there.
Yeah, please do.
We didn't account for the fact that you also need to smelt those bars and smith them. So it would be significantly less than that. That was
That is
just
true.
the gathering.
That's just the gathering. So yeah,
So
you're gathering was it
yeah, so
250
it's
an
less than
hour?
that, but we're in
Yeah.
that sort of like 5 to 700k
Yeah.
range, somewhere in there probably.
I think
Four, five, six, probably somewhere there.
I would say that I mean, frankly, even if it's like 250k, it would still be too much, I think, for like a little
Sure,
50 method.
sure.
Like you can get that in a day or two.
Mhm.
So I think that my solution, my idea for like keeping things old school and keeping things like, making sure bosses still drop your rune scimitars, making sure that, you can gather stuff at level 50 rather than 99, like all that stuff to keep the things the same while, not disproportionately affecting the pacing of the Iron Man game mode or the economy of the core metals in the main game would be to include a tiered kind of reinforcement system, which I know sounds daunting, but I can quickly explain. This actually exists in RuneScape 3 too. So essentially, when you create let's say, for example, a rune plate body in RuneScape 3, it's 5 rune bars. And then instead of just like alching it or throwing it out, what you can do is you can reinforce it to a rune plate body +1 by adding 10 bars, 10 more rune bars to that plate body, and then reinforce it and restart the smithing process and essentially recraft it. It gives more experience, so 10 bars worth of experience instead of 5, but also has higher stats and a higher alch value because the alch value is determined by the amount of bars, I guess in this case, that you used to create the item. And then you can do it to a +2. That's the cap, I think, or +3 is the cap for rune, right? So you can just, and then it's 15 bars, and then 20 bars, and then eventually this item has 30 bars worth of, effort invested in it. It gave you 30 bars worth of experience without the need to craft the same item multiple times, but also now that item itself gives you better stats and has more value. And the value part here is what's important. So imagine a situation where you could invest more. So imagine a situation where we lower the alch values for rune items by 5x as an example, right? So it's a rune plate body now would alch for, 6K maybe, like 6, 7K, rather than the 36K or whatever. But now you could reinforce it. So now you can make it a runeplate body +3 or a masterwork runeplate body, whatever language we want to use that feels more old school to people. It has better stats, maybe a little bit, maybe like a couple more defense levels, whatever, or defense bonuses, whatever. And it required, instead of 5 bars to craft, 30 bars. And when it's 30 bars at full reinforcement, quote unquote, tier, it gives you that same alch value that you would have before. So a 36K alch. And that way, and this kind of does two things, I think, in a semi-clean way. You can still have the rune alching experience that people associate with old school, and you could just replace existing drops with reinforced versions of those drops. So a rune scimitar's alch might only be 2K or 1K in this new version of mining or a new version of smithing that we've invented, but the fire giant could just drop a reinforced rune scimitar that still alchs and does the same thing the current one does. And I think that way you keep the alch, you keep the economy static, while also adding a bit more depth and consistency to the smithing in general. So you're not just creating the same item a billion times too. It kind of does two birds with one stone. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, my initial reaction to that is I love that idea, and there's so many things you said that I agree that it does well in one sort of like encapsulated method, especially the idea of like you're investing in items and smithing them to improve them. That's another thing that you'll find in a lot of RPGs. Like I feel like Elder Scrolls games tend to have that type of, like Skyrim. I know you can like make a iron sword, and then it's like an iron sword fine, and then an iron sword exquisite, and then like whatever keeps getting better. I love that type of system, and I think the idea of investing bars into something so that you don't just end up with just shit tons of excess items laying around can do a lot of good things. I also feel like it makes you actually feel like you're making something, which I think is a really fun idea.
That is by the way probably my biggest praise for the RS3 smithing system. For as much as I am critical of how AFK it can feel, which I just don't like that gameplay loop that RS3 loves a lot, which is just kind of AFKing something for a long time. I give it a lot of credit for the fact that the smithing process in the game of like heating up a bar and then you're hitting the bar with your hammer, and then the bar cools down and becomes slower, so you have to reheat it, and then you're hitting it again. That process, it feels like you're smithing an item rather than just banging a thing for 2 seconds and then getting the item pop out, of your butt, right? Like it's a much more
Right.
immersive, I guess you could say, in a cheesy way, and
Totally.
a much more immersive experience. And it also is paced in a way to not make someone able to make 500 rune plate bodies in a second and maybe affect the amount of that item that exists in the game world. Sorry, continue.
So yeah, I have a lot of positive things to say about that. And I love that system, and I think that it's a very progressive system, which I think I would be totally down for. I can also totally put myself in the shoes of the player listening to that and saying, and be like, that doesn't feel right to me. Like, it doesn't feel right to have these sort of tiers of these classic items. Something about that kind of betrays what we're talking about, that old school feel. There's something about these sort of like, rune plate body +1, which admittedly is not a hard thing to understand, but something about it just doesn't quite feel right. I can totally put myself in the shoes of that player. And it goes to one of the other things that I think for me, the most ideal solution includes, which is, and this is very high up on my list. I think other people maybe have different opinions on this. And I realize that it's a pretty large obstacle in the way of a rework, but which is not adding a lot of new items. Now, I recognize that what you're talking about, those aren't really new items. They're sort of new, riders on old items. But at the same time, it does add. We were talking before we recorded this about this document that came out talking about skilling, and one of the things that it mentions talks about comprehension complexity, which is just like how complex is something to understand, like just get the information out of. And I think that's another thing that I put highly on my list is whatever the solution is, it has very low complexity to understand. Because if you give RuneScape one thing, it's that all the skilling has insanely low comprehension complexity. You take your bar to the anvil, you smith the thing, and you have a thing. And that's it. And it's almost too simple. I think we can agree that there's probably room for a little more complexity than that. But I think if someone's listening and they're like, this doesn't feel right to me, I think it's because it's maybe adding too much complexity to a system that is historically so simple. And for me, maybe they're also thinking like, that's a lot of new items. Like, can you sell a rune plate body +1 on the GE? Like, if I type in rune plate body, do I have 5 list items that pops up? Am I going to have my bank is going to be full of rune plates 1 and 2 and 3, and same with all the other items? I don't think those are huge issues necessarily, but I think I can understand why someone would look at that and be like, it feels a bit like forestry, right? I think forestry is a great example of something that just added a shit ton of items to the game, none of which really do anything. And I think for a lot of players, they look at them and they just get mad. You know what I mean? They're like, get these fucking beehive parts out of my face. I don't want to see it. It's stupid. You know what I mean? I feel like there's a chance for.
I'm very sympathetic to that. I think that when thinking of these things, I always try to put myself in as conservative a place as I can for when it comes to adding new stuff, right? Conceptually, I have a billion ideas of adding more depth to smithing, and I think that would be cool. I would probably enjoy that, but I also recognize that it's not always the game that I'm playing, and I think defaulting to a more simple option where possible is a great idea. I do want to also, again, not to just permanently glaze RS3 here, because I think there are plenty of issues even with the mining and smithing rework, which I think is quite good. It's the idea that the original items, so I think it's bronze through steel, actually don't have any reinforcement on them or any ability to upgrade them. It's actually something you learn the deeper in the actual smithing progression you go, which to me solves that problem of immediately getting a bit overwhelmed with all these different versions, right? You're starting off very simple of 1 to 1, and then it becomes a 1 to 2, where now you can upgrade a mithril plate body once, and then you upgrade, and then you go to rune, and so you can upgrade twice. And I think that it's it's about as smooth of an onboarding as you can get, I think, with a system like this. Although I obviously fully recognize, and I don't love the solution of I have a exquisite rune plate body, a masterwork rune plate body, and a regular rune plate body sitting next to each other in the bank. I think that to me is not the cleanest or most ideal solution, although it's one that I think is a relatively minor burden to bear if it involves creating essentially just completely rebirthing a skill as a skill that's actually exciting and fun to engage with, rather than a thing you ignore until you get a quest requirement, or until you need to fix up a zombie axe, and then you just sit it in a mini game like Blast Furnace or Giant's Foundry as your only two methods of actually smithing, which to me that really is the most unfortunate part of smithing, and the most unfortunate part of needing to be a bit more conservative here of well, then what's well, then how do people even engage in the game today? Well, you do Giant's Foundry, which to me is way more complicated than anything we're talking about right now, where you have to do different molds for optimal points. You have to download a plugin. You have to Giant's Foundry is more complex than than adding 5 more rune bars to your plate body.
Notably, though, let's throw this in there. It's comprehension complexity, but this document that came out the other day talks about the other types of complexity, which is strategic. So actually knowing how to apply what the like what you've comprehended, and then also execution, how hard it is to actually do those things, it scores like a 0 on both of those things.
Exactly.
It's like an 8 out of 10 comprehension and a 0 out of 10 on the other ones. And I think that places it in a very bad place for a lot of players. In fact, I think that's probably just about the worst like scoring. I mean, you're trying to keep comprehension as low as possible, and the other two appropriately leveled to the place in the game. So yeah, that's just to throw that out there with Giants Foundry.
Exactly. So it's like now you have a skill that's defined by 2 mini games or 2 activities of that skill, because no one does it like in its original form. And I guess to me, and this is not me discrediting your perspective, because I know you're talking from the perspective of a more conservative player base, and I don't want to discredit them as well, because I empathize with their perspectives there. But like, if we can shoulder the Giants Foundry existing, which to me is a totally like not, I mean, as much as I don't hate the Giants Foundry, and I don't hate it, and I think it's fine, but like, when it comes to like, what would I rather have? An upgraded version of a rune plate body that I just added more rune bars for, or like 32 different molds to create items that don't actually exist because you just hand them in and get like a gold out of like that to me is so much more alien to the functionality of the game. And like, and if we're fine with one thing, I think we should be more open-minded for the more like, you know, traditional way, because frankly, if they do a mining and smithing rework and they're like, well, we're removing Giants Foundry, they won't do that. But like, imagine if they would do that, I wouldn't like be, you know, shedding tears over it. The same applies to Blast
Let's
Furnace.
throw this, let's just real quick. If you are listening to this and you are the type of person who isn't super into the idea of like these sort of like upgraded individual versions, curious to know in the comments if you would prefer that to Giants Foundry. Maybe you love Giants Foundry. Maybe you absolutely hate Giants Foundry, and now you have to compare between 2 things you don't like. I'd be very curious to hear people's opinions if they, you know, if for some reason they were going to add one or remove the other, what you would want. Okay, continue.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great perspective to have, because when I look at a skill, right, I look at it, what is it intended to do? Smithing is obviously, I think most people would agree, intended to create your own items. It fails at that, which creates a giant gap in, you know, intent, functionality, everything. Now it has a lot of patchwork fixes to make the process of doing it faster. So Giants Foundry, what's it called? Blast Furnace. These speed up the grind to meet whatever you're trying to get, a quest requirement, a 99, whatever it might be, but the core intent still falls flat. And I think that, to me,
right, they bypass the identity of the skill.
Yeah, and I think reinforcing the identity, no pun intended, is the goal. So if we can everyone listening, even if you don't want it to be reworked, I think we can all agree, I hope, that reinforcing the intent of a skill makes for a better skill, right? Like, even if it's just adding another mini game to the game, like if that's the solution you prefer, I rather that mini game be evocative of the intent of the skill rather than a completely separate element. That's part of what I don't love about Blast Furnace. It was originally intended as a fast way to smelt bars to allow you to do smithing. Now it's just a fast way to make gold that you'll never use again. And that is a very...
It was also meant to be at a high cost.
At a high cost,
It has this upkeep cost that has not changed with the economy of the game. I feel like that was supposed to be the idea, is like you could basically pay more for your bars than, you know, you're trading money for time. Now you're just gaining time. The money cost is irrelevant. Just
that's actually a great point. I completely, that's exactly exactly. I think that I would love if we can like strip back some of these systems, not to say that I want them to be removed. I just want to exist in a world where they're not the only outlet for the skill itself. I guess that's my like roundabout way of defending like a potential, addition or complexifying slightly an existing skill, if that creates less complexity or less system bloat in the game overall. That's always been my outlook on that. So if we agree on what the intent of a skill should be, right, like smithing and crafting your own armor, what other intent or elements of smithing should exist within it? that's my secondary thought process. Like the best OSRS skills, I think most people can agree, are those that influence the way you play outside of just that skill. The worst skills are the ones that feel super insular and disconnected from the game itself. The ones that really kind of cross-pollinate into 10 other things, like herb lore, it influences like everything from your run energy to skilling boosts to your combats. Also construction, like such a big
Mm-hmm.
QOL skill, right?
Magic's my favorite
Magic
skill.
is the best, right? Like magic is amazing, right? I think that to me is crucial to capturing. And right now, smithing, obviously, as one may expect, does not capture any of that. So I guess my question is to you actually is what should smithing connect with as a skill outside of just mining? And how do you envision
Mhm.
those connections?
So in terms of the identity of the skill, what it should do, what it should really be used for, how it should connect, I think we've seen one really good example that people have seemed to really like, which is oathplate smithing. And that smithing being tied to PVM, first of all, PVM is very popular. So having it be this sort of like, you know, wingman to drop rates and items and gear, I think would make it very popular. If that was its use case, so for oathplate smithing, its use case is dry protection, um, which slash I guess money making. I'm not sure, is oathplate smithing a money maker? People do that.
I don't think so. I think it's just dry protection right now, but
Okay,
I could be wrong
okay.
there.
I
I
feel
could
like
be
when it
wrong.
came out, people were like, "Shale is worth it, whatever. It doesn't matter." Um, so yeah, right. I mean, I don't honestly. I've never done it. I feel like you'd be better to speak on it, but I think just from a high level perspective, the idea that smithing interacts at low levels with player created gear and at high levels with drops and dry protection or augmenting those drops, or I mean just smithing things, right? Creating things that you use for your account. I think that would be a great place for it that people would actually really enjoy. And it could, I mean, it currently essentially has that role, just in like a really kind of lackluster way of smithing, god swords. It's something you do like once and you're like, okay, or whatever. But if we could expand that a little bit, I think that could be a really cool place for the skill to live that people would really see value in.
Yeah, I think that this is a very interesting conversation because it's deceptively complicated. It's deceptively hard. And I want to quickly try my best to explain why, and maybe I'm wrong. So if I am, then perfect. But I- the the core issue is that when we get past that rune tier, level 50, is the second we start potentially devaluing um, other sets of armor. So dragon, barrows, and I guess there's justiciar, but that's barely even a thing. And that's just assuming you create, and that's just assuming you create tank armor, right? I think that's always been my concern with potentially just doing a one-to-one RS3 smithing kind of adaptation, because I don't think you should be able to create armor that is as tanky as barrows at level 70 smithing. Maybe you should. Maybe that's something people are open to. But I think the reason why barrows holds its place today, outside of just a couple set effects, is it being accessible early game tank armor. And I think that it would be it would be a very difficult solution. You might be wondering, how does RS3 thread that needle? And this is something that I spent yesterday kind of looking into as a newer player. And it does so in ways that don't apply to OSRS, but maybe they do, so that's why I'm going to tell them. So the big kind of differentiator between your crafted smithing armor, so your tier 70 smithing armor, tier 80 smithing armor, which is conceptually just as tanky in RS3 as the Barrow's armor is in RS3, is that Barrow's armor is augmentable, so it synergizes with the invention skill, which is its own separate beast in RS3 that allows you to add perks and all this kind of stuff to your armor, while you can't do that for your smithing armor, meaning that the smith armor is always going to be conceptually worse than augmentable armor. It's kind of like an easy solution for quick tanking gear, but it's not a permanent solution like getting the Barrow set or whatever tier 80 and tier 90 sets there are in RS3. So that was their solution for that, is connecting it to the invention skill, and the invention skill adds an implicit value to augmentable stuff, which is uniques from bosses and all that. In OSRS, we obviously don't have that solution. So by adding tier 70, tier 80, tier 90 armor to smithing, we really run the risk of devaluing existing things that we all know and love, like barrows.
All I was going to say is that I actually wasn't pitching smithing being the source of those items. Like you're saying, if you are going out and you're mining new ore that's more powerful than rune, and you're smithing that into dragon equivalent items or barrows equivalent items or justy equivalent items. That's not what I was saying. I was saying it would interact with it more like
invention,
more like Oathplate, where you are interacting with drops from PVM and sort of using those as a sort of like a reward space / it's just this thing to have alongside PVM that generates utility. Like, you don't need to have smithing to get full Oathplate, but you would benefit from it if you're getting all these these drops of the Oathplate, whatever. I haven't done it, so I don't even know the names of that. But the things you use to create Oathplate from the activity itself, and then you use your smithing to actually create that. I think that's a really great place for the skill to be. And I might compare it to something like construction, which is, like we were saying, a generally well-liked skill, where the method of training it kind of sucks. It's pretty archaic, but everyone's okay with that because the rewards are so good, and they are so they feel so like tied to the progression of the skill that you don't mind training it. You don't mind the fact that it costs tons of GP and resources, and because you get something out of it that you really like, that you really want. It's good for your account. It's untradeable. You can't go buy it. You think it'd be similar with smithing. That's sort of how I'm picturing it, where so like a thing that came up a bunch of times. I've seen this in a couple of different reworks. In fact, there's a rework pitch that I would love to touch on in a little bit, that talks about like breaking down gear into shards. So like Barrows shards, for example. Barrows is a great example because it's right above the smith items. So it's like in a reasonable part of the game where maybe it's okay to mess with it a little bit, as long as it preserves what you're saying about being kind of holding its place in that area. The idea that you could break down a Barrows piece into components and then use your smithing skill to recombine those components into maybe another Barrows piece. I think that's a great space for smithing to exist in. And that way, it's kind of like dry protection / this like economic equalizer that makes Barrows honestly just like more worth doing in general. So just to elaborate on that a little bit, if you're kind of like, what the hell you're talking about, this wasn't exactly what I saw, but this is just sort of what it made me think of, is like, okay, let's say you can break down, let's just say you want full Darox. Let's say you're an Iron Man in this case, just it makes it really easy. You want full Darox. You have 3 of the 4 pieces. You're like deep into Barrows. And what you could do is you could take your Torax piece that you don't need. You already have one of those or whatever. You break it down into, let's say, 5 Barrows shards or something. And then to smith your Darox piece, you need 10 Barrows shards. And so you could break down 2 of your Torags to create enough shards to create your 1 Darox. So in that sense, it ends up being A, dry protection, B, reward space, and C, a sink for the items, and D, an equalizer, so every Barrows drop is about as good as half as much of the best item. So that is just a space that I feel like people could really get on board with, and it wouldn't be like, oh, well, that makes Barrows irrelevant. It's actually like, oh, that makes Barrows really, really rewarding feeling. Like you can, if you get a Darox piece, that's still sick because it's valuable. If you get like a Carol's Top or whatever the most expensive one is, that's still really valuable. But if you get something else, that's okay because you can craft it into the most expensive thing. Or if you're an Iron Man, you can craft it into whatever you need. So, you're cutting down your time to achieve all the items by like half or so, which I think is pretty reasonable because it gets exponentially more annoying as number of items you need goes down.
Yeah, this is where I think the conversation becomes more interesting. At least from like a design standpoint, because after you're done retiering, actually, but even before I get into that, I just want to say no. I didn't mean to like misinterpret what you were saying initially. I was aware of what you were saying. I was just trying to like set the stage for like why it would be hard to just because sometimes you just look at the smithing proposals or the smithing rework proposals and they yeah you add like a 60 to your 70 to your 80 to your 90 and then just like call it a day, right? Like
Right.
that's the easy solution, but it
Right.
creates a lot of really
Right.
negative ripple effects. So I appreciate I appreciate you kind of giving an example of the Barrows perspective that you have. So like the reason this I think is a more interesting conversation just from like a design standpoint is because retiering is one thing and solving the economic burden is one thing, but at a certain point, so in our case at level 50, we have to kind of make a executive decision of what to do. And on one hand, I think that it's problematic that the skill would change faces at level 50 plus, because then you're not making your own armor, you're creating different versions of existing armors, and then you have different like components for those armors that you can craft down. That almost creates like a now they have to make unique armor specific components whenever they add a new armor set. I think that I like the idea. It's actually very reminiscent of Invention in RS3 from the what I understand about Invention, where every item in the game can be broken down to components, and there are unique components associated with unique items. Like Barrows have undead components that you can use to create like unique perks that you put on your armor. That's a core functionality of Invention, and this is reminiscent of that functionality where instead of making augments to existing items, you're making the items themselves with a skill, which still fits the thematic element of the skill. So I actually like that idea a lot. And I would love to see an element of that, for example, like imagine you go through 50 smithing, and then we can come up with something from to say for 60, but at 70 you unlock the ability to break down barrows and recraft items, and that way you can either roll the dice, roll the
Exactly.
RNG, or you can grind your smithing long enough to kind of create a roundabout method of dry protection, which I know makes some people bristle, and I generally don't want dry protection in my game. Just in like a back end sense, I don't want you to like always just randomly get the item after 100 kills. But I think creating a in-universe version of it is way cooler because it's not really dry protection. It's still RNG dependent, right? Like you're still reliant on getting the item to break it down. It's just which
Right.
items you're looking
Like if you
for.
go
And
back to back chests, you're still like, oh hell yeah, sick. That means I got some. There's still RNG to it. You're like excited. Or if you go hella dry for an item, you're still like, wow, this sucks. Like it's not exactly dry protection.
yeah, and that's exactly what I mean there. And I think that is where we get into an interesting thing. So like for example, from like 70 to 75, you could create this ability to make barrows, and that could be like that could be the progression point in the 70s. In the 80s, you can come up with something for bandos maybe, or for other armor sets. And for 90s, we can come up with something else too. But like so that's actually an interesting solution that retains the I guess the ethos, the philosophy of smithing, of like making your own armor without like just power creeping barrows or creating a much easier alternative to grinding barrows. I think that's a very interesting solution there, and I definitely support your take on that. I think to me, when it comes to the way smithing it connects and integrates with different skills, I think PVM is certainly, as you outlined, a great path. It's a great path to connect the skill. I also would love to see it connect with other skills such as crafting and fletching, and I think for me, I always try to shoot for the stars sometimes with some of my ideas, and I know that some people say like, oh, you're trying to overcomplicate things, and I totally get that criticism, but like I would love a version of smithing that connects to skills in the way that Herblore does, where it influences so many different things and benefits from you having those things at a high enough level. Like an example would be your ability to smith barrows is reliant on your ability to kill barrows, right? Which requires like 60s in your combat stats, I guess, right? In your magic level. The same would apply. Sorry, I just had a computer pop up. The same would apply to, for example, having a crafting level requirement to maybe add an augment to an item, right? That's always been something that I've been interested in conceptually with the potential smithing rework is essentially creating cooler versions or more personalized versions of existing pieces of armor without drastically overcomplicating the game or destroying the integrity of just the simplicity of the game. I love the idea of being able to like craft a. I think one of the ideas I might have mentioned to you like a long time ago when I came up with it is like a potion pouch that connects to your like a satchel or not a sash, I guess, a leather sash that connects to your plate body, your rune plate body, for example. You can make it at like 60 crafting, and it can store one potion on that sash, right? Like as like a very niche, unique way to extend a trip in your PVM, or something along those like lines where it connects with the crafting skill. It can connect with fletching in some way where you can like whittle an element, an emblazoned hilt on your rune scimitar. Things like that I know are kind of out there, but or even from a PVM standpoint, Slayer. And I know you kind of we've talked about this before, but like the idea of adding value to the first 75 levels of Slayer, not just by bloating them with new Slayer mobs that do have value, but by retroactively adding value to existing Slayer mobs like cave bugs, by them making them drop like chitin that you can use to create unique things with the smithing skill. Like things like that to me create a lot more of like a evocative RPG experience in the early game of RuneScape, where a lot of the existing RPG experience has been in with age devalued thanks to things like quest skips and like optimal routing or just skills no longer having any value, like with smithing that we're talking about, where the potential RPG elements can come in, they have just kind of not aged well. So now most people's early game in OSRS is just like speed running quests and getting all your stats to 50 by doing that, which is fine. You can keep that, but it certainly isn't old school, right? Like it certainly isn't an OG thing to do. It's definitely a new thing. And I feel like if we're advocating for a return to a traditional option, just an option, that these are the kinds of ways to do that, right? Giving value to creatures you would otherwise never do in early game Slayer. Sorry for the yap there.
Now, you and I love this topic of ideating on cool ideas because there genuinely are so many sort of one-off ideas on things you can implement into smithing that like make perfect sense and are like you could find so many cool examples. And I feel like I said, we love doing that. We get to hear and do that all day.
Yeah. Okay.
And I feel like to me, the more I look at this issue from sort of a bird's eye view, those ideas to me seem reliant on step one, which is the fixing of the core metals. Not even like, basically, I think that if we're gonna change smithing, step one is to take that core metal progression and squish it down and sort of let that be the new core of the skill and see how that feels. And then we try to add more cool stuff to it as opposed to doing a ton of changes all at once.
Yeah, definitely. 100%.
So I want to respond with all my cool ideas, like a recoil armor, like a shield with a spike on it. Like that sounds sick to me. But what I would love to do before we go too deep in that, or maybe we'll have to save that sort of super deep conversation for another time, is sort of return to, we've talked a lot about ideas, what we do want, what we don't want, some like we could fix it this way, oh, maybe we shouldn't fix it that way, of the core metals. And I kind of want to look at this Reddit post that the reason I want to focus on this is that it got this response from Mod Kiernan, basically saying like, I like this more or less. I'll just read his response. We haven't talked about the Reddit post itself, but this is how he responded to it, just for preface. Really interesting proposal for how to approach the mining smithing problem. It's something I'm keen for us to get a better grasp on how we might go about it before I feel so comfortable putting it on the roadmap and moving forward to doing something. First thing to say is I agree with the constraints. They are generally what I'd consider necessary. And that is, I think, a pretty significant ringing endorsement of, okay, we at least are on the same page of what it needs to do, which we've already sort of outlined. And I feel like it might be useful to talk about what the JMods have also seemingly agreed, is necessary. So do you mind if we pivot to this
Yeah,
topic
yeah,
here?
let's do that. Let's do that. I think that as you pointed out, I think that we all have a billion different ideas that are kind of out there. I just all I wanted to do is like emphasize that I think the best RuneScape skills are those that connect with other skills rather than exist singularly in their own little bubble. But I think that that's the kind of stuff that gets developed out in time. I think focusing on the singular method is the correct way to do. And I will, for all the listeners, link this Reddit post in the description as well, because I think it's important to maybe check it out if you want.
Yeah, it's worth looking at. I'm not going to read every word on it because it's pretty long. This came out 9 months ago, by the way. It's by user Baroque Spoon. And I'm going to start off by reading the parameters that Kieran said he liked. These are probably going to sound pretty similar to what we've already said. We didn't really say them in one big list, but this proposal says the goal for this proposal is address the issues within the following constraints. A, alch prices are unchanged. B, level requirements for wearing gear are unchanged. C, smithing's core mechanics are unchanged. Smithing XP rates and metas are relatively unchanged. Iconic level requirements for smithing and mining are relatively unchanged. So there's an interesting thing, which is that last one is the way they handle that is interesting, because it's hard to say, well, let's keep those iconic level requirements for smithing and mining, but also do a level squish, because that's basically what they're talking about here. And so I kind of want to talk about how they go about that. They also, on this Reddit post, basically say exactly what we said, which is OSRS promises you something on Tutorial Island. Smithing lets you make melee gear at the level you need it. Someone with level 1 smithing can smith level 1 bars to create level 1 gear. Wonderful. And then go on to say that it's immediately broken, which is exactly what we talked about. So they start with a mining change, which we haven't talked about at all. So maybe it's a good time to talk about how mining could change to match this. So their proposal here is, if you can smith rune at around 40, then you should be able to mine it at around 40 also. But how do you do this without flooding the economy with these high alch value rune items? And their proposal is, I'll just read it. Introducing deposits, a low intensity method of acquiring ores at lower mining levels. Deposits behave somewhat like infernal shale deposits. They deplete on a set timer, but that timer shrinks as more people mine the node. The depletion rate varies per deposit type. Coal deposits will last a long while, but botting runite deposits won't work. So basically, they're saying too many people mining the same thing, it depletes faster as an anti-botting thing. I think a lot of us have kind of gone the other way, like, oh, forestry, when you cut the tree, you get more logs, whatever. But I think their point about botting is fine. So basically, they're saying it's more like trees. You're mining it over time. You're getting things over time. Successful rolls on a deposit only rarely reward ore. Players can expect around 7 ore from mining runite deposits per hour. Other successful rolls will instead yield XP and, I don't know how to say this word, gange. It's like a rock. Gange is a tier list resource. It can be processed with a hammer and chisel to rarely yield lower level ore or gems. Its main job is to slowly fill one's inventory, much like logs received from infected roots. Just drop it. So basically, you're getting mining experience while doing this by getting this random crap, but you're dropping it so that there's some level of interaction with the method. You're not just like, shooting stars the whole thing. And then deposits yield enough resources for player to smith their own armor in a way that protects the OSRS economy, or will still be overwhelmingly be supplied by regular rocks and other activities at the existing level requirements. So basically he's saying, and this is something that I feel like maybe we should have made a little more clear earlier on, which is in the goal of bringing these things down and sort of fulfilling the promise of smithing your own gear of these core tiers. We don't need the player to have access to smithing endless numbers of them at the way that we currently do. When you reach the smithing level to smith, like, addy plate bodies or whatever, like, you can just mass produce them kind of with ease. His point is, you don't need, at level 40, you don't need to be able to mass produce these. You need to be able to make like one, or two, like a set of this armor is what you actually want. We don't want these players to be making, like, millions of GP worth of these um, items, but we do want them to be able to make them at all. And so how do you do that? And the answer is you just get those resources very slowly at lower levels, and it increases over time, leveling up to your, like, sort of he's mentioning the iconic levels. So like 85 is the mining level for Rune right now. Like that mining level and the sort of outputs that we currently understand those resources to come at will be unchanged. Whereas using these deposits, you can get them more slowly at lower levels. What do you think about that as a sort of baseline mining fix?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I looked through his proposal, and again, it's linked in the Reddit. Oh, sorry, in the Reddit. Oh my god, in the YouTube video. It's an interesting idea. I think that I like it. I'm also mixed on it. It's very like, it's dependent on obviously being as conservative as possible to appeal to a demographic of OSRS players that I think are, I guess, frightened of adding all of these drastic changes to an existing skill. I would go so far as to say that I think that this, like, a drastic change to smithing is a easier sell than a new skill like sailing, at least in my perspective. So I think more people would be amicable to larger changes. And the only reason I say that, the only reason, is because I think it would be strange to go somewhere, mine for a while, get like the little bit of ore you need to create, a rune item or whatever a new tier of item is, and then go back to like mining shooting stars for the rest of your leveling experience. Because that's functionally, from what I understand anyway, the like, I guess, perspective here, because he has this list of, like, for example, the tier 60 rocks, the Dracolith rocks, which again, all of these are just from RS3. The tier 60 Dracolith rocks, which would create, I'm assuming, some important material for at that level. And he lists like the deposit, which is more AFK, low amount of experience, positive. I like that idea. He lists rocks, which I'm assuming deplete like regular rocks, but he lists them at 18 to 55k an hour, which I'm assuming is dependent on your mining level. But these would just be super contested because we've never had items in OSRS that deplete as quickly as ore does that are actually important items. Like, no one's really mining adamant because it's completely fucking useless. But if there was an actual use for it, like for these Dracolith rocks, it'd be really good mining experience, 55k an hour, and you have to do it actively, whatever it might be. I think that they would be flooded with players. And that would be like my concern there, where it's like, okay, you create two areas to do it, and it would just be completely flooded with either bots or whatever else that are covering that territory, and you're just stuck either doing deposits or shooting stars. And I think that that is just like, I guess for me, that's just kind of an immediate concern I have, where I like the solution as a conservative one, but I'm concerned with the solution as a new method of actually engaging with both mining and smithing, where if the way you engage with mining is just still AFKing shooting stars 99% of the time or doing motherload mine, but sometimes, you can go there for an hour and get a new set of armor for smithing, that to me strikes me as a bit of a band-aid. And that band-aid comes with the baggage of having like 90 new items be introduced into the game, which, like, if we're adding all these new ores and rocks and materials and gauge into the game, it needs to actually be something that you engage with as you train the skill properly. It can't just be like a one-off thing until late levels, just because there's a level of like iconic, like, there's an iconic element to 85 mining being required for Runite, when I would, and this is my like super modern take on it, so I apologize if this comes off as disconnected from a more conservative player base, but like, to me, there is nothing iconic about 85 mining. I've never mined Rune in my entire life playing the game, and I don't think most people have either. Like, I almost wonder, like, I think a JMod did say that, and I'm sorry for yapping, but I think a JMod did say that most people playing the game today didn't play back in 2007. I'm not sure if there is a level of iconic, like, reverence to the idea of mining rune at 85 when I would say that most people online right now have never mined a rune rock in their entire life. And I would even go so far as to say that 50% of those players don't even know the level requirement for mining a rune rock. Because it's just such an irrelevant thing you would do. And I guess that's my reaction, where like I like the solution as a conservative one. I'm critical of it as an actual thing I would enjoy in the game itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point is sort of importance or not, or existence of those players or not. I think that we can both say that it would pretty easily pass a poll to, you know, it's like, if it's just like, is 85 mining to mine a rune rock important to you? You know, yes or no, and you poll everybody. I think that the 70% would probably say no. I'm not personally attached to that. Like,
yeah, okay. I thought you were saying the opposite. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I don't think people care. I don't think people care that much.
There's probably some people who do, but not enough. And once again, I mean, to the point we made earlier, like for those people, it's purely conceptual. But those people are not the people who hit 85 mining. They're like, hell yeah, I'm gonna go mine some rune rocks. Like, they're not doing it because it doesn't make sense. It's not worth doing. But they are protecting it out of a sense of nostalgia, which, like, they're not bad people for that. But I think that it's fair to say that that's not like productive for the game per se. So yeah, you jumped ahead a little bit, which is totally fine about this mining thing, which is that if you haven't seen the Reddit post later on, so yeah, they added these deposits. Those are physical objects in the game. They're like rocks. And then they also are proposing these new other deposits. They list a whole bunch of them: Luminite, Dracolith, Phasmatite, Infernal Shale, which obviously already exists in the game. It's in the thing. And they go on, and those are used for like sort of more advanced smithing things. And personally, when I look at this is my least favorite part of it also, just in less about what you were saying about the competition, which is very fair to say. If we just sort of leave rocks as they currently are, which is you mine them and they go away for kind of a long ass time, and then you can mine one again. But more so just that it goes against my personal goal of not adding a whole bunch of new items to the game. I don't think these are necessary. Personally, I don't find these a necessary part. I think the goal with this was to flesh out the mining leveling spectrum, which I don't personally feel that strongly about. Fleshing out mining all the way up with new rocks every level.
Not to cut you off, but I just want to really quickly ask you a question. I'm sorry, because this is super relevant to what you're saying right now. Is I think like just pulling back for just a brief moment and asking you the question, and I want to ask this to everyone, whoever I bring on this podcast for this topic, is what does it look like to engage in these two skills, mining and smithing, right? Like if smithing, are we okay with smithing being core metals to 50 and then new stuff to 90? Not new core metals, not like Phasmatite, Dracolith, Dark Animica, but just like the Bear's idea you had, right? Are we okay with that being the fantasy of smithing, the arc of smithing? Or do we want it to just be more new core metals? RS3 went more new core metals as the core of smithing because it felt like natural to the way it was originally intended. But in our retroactive or retrospective or new perspective, it doesn't need to be 1 through 90 is 10, and every 10 tiers is a new armor set. Like, we don't need to do that. It can just be bronze to rune to 50, and then we have a whole different kind of like evolution of that format to 99. It could be that we don't need to adhere to a strict paradigm there. And the same applies to mining. Mining, after maxing, I can really say this, is really well integrated into the game. There are so many mining methods, from mining the rune for rune crafting in the Arceus mine, to doing it for prayer XP in Camptorum, to granite and sandstone, to shale, infernal shale is listed here. There are so many different ways to mine in the game, so many, and with different activity levels. We don't need a new core metal every 10 levels. I don't feel like mining even has space for that, frankly. But maybe I'm totally wrong there. How do you feel about that? Because I wanted to just ask you if what your stance on that is.
Yeah. No, I mean, I totally agree. that we don't necessarily need to fill every level with something new. I actually think that this would be a much easier proposal to get across to people if it didn't include a whole bunch of new things, because that's just a lot more to have to wrap your mind around and balance and whatever. It'd be a lot easier to just kind of squish things down. And also, in terms of sort of the statement that like, okay, that means that there's this whole gap of levels that unlock things. I think you're also right in saying that we don't necessarily need to fill those out with unlocks per se. Think about like combat skills. You don't level up your strength because you're like, oh, I can't wait to wield. I don't even know what you need high strength to wield. You're not leveling it up for that reason. You're leveling it up because it impacts your gameplay while using the skill. And so I think the same is true. The same could easily be true from, perspective on something like mining, where you're like, I'm leveling up mining so that I can use, you get like your dragon pickaxe, and all of a sudden every level is like, I'm a little bit better at mining. I'm a little bit better at mining the same things I was mining before. So if it's at motherlode mine, you're getting more motherlode mine per hour. If you're an AFK type of player, it's more stardust per hour. Like you are getting value out of your levels, but you're not necessarily getting unlocks. And I think that's an okay place to start. I think you're right that there are room to add sort of like one-off little methods here that integrate with other things. I love that idea. I think that the prayer mining in Camtorm is a great example of like this, you use your mining for this. It's not necessarily like this huge unlock or something crazy, but if you have high mining, you can go there and get a lot of prayer experience. It's great. So I agree. I don't think we need to go down this route of tons and tons of new unlocks. I think it's okay if there's a couple here and there, right? You got Infernal Shale towards the end of the game. You got higher level stars and stuff. Like it's fine. And then also, you can just, if your only goal is mining XP, there are other methods for that too, which don't need to fit into this sort of tiered thing. It'd be cool if it did, but it doesn't need to happen. I don't think that's a critical, how many methods in the game do you truly think of as like every 10 levels or so you get something new that replaces the thing you were doing before? Like there really aren't very many that I can think of.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want to just harp on for a moment. Like that's exactly how I feel. I don't think it's necessary. And in a weird way, I feel like that doesn't feel old school to me. I think it feels very like modern survival game, right? Where like, oh, I got my bone items at level 1, and I got my bronze items at level 10, and then my iron items. And I get that was like the original like incarnation of it. But I think that the way the game has evolved since, right? Because we can't just look at the original incarnation of something when it hasn't been relevant for 25 years. I think like the way the game has evolved since then has been in a much more interesting way, right? Not everything is just 10 level brackets until the next thing. Now we have all kinds of unique things that you can do with other unique things that influence other unique things. And I think that kind of, I guess, promoting that is way more important. And I think sailing, for all of its existing faults, did that well, where you have Barracuda trials that are like complete, like 30, 52, 78. You have different for salvaging, you have like different level brackets that aren't just 10 level. Like you have all these different unlocks that populate your progression that aren't just replacing the existing thing. That I think is a really important, ethos to carry forward. And while I recognize the convenience of defaulting to like 2001 perspectives, or frankly, in a simple way, just looking at RS3 and going, well, this is how they did it, is not necessarily how it should be done in OSRS. And this kind of does double back into that original point I made with like, okay, well, if you're adding new items every 10 tiers, but those new items aren't influencing smithing, they almost feel really perfunctory in some ways, because you're like, okay, so I'm mining this thing, but it's not actually influencing like an armor set I create. So it becomes very like lopsided in some ways. I think that all I'm trying to say is that it's okay for every 10 levels not to be a new thing that replaces the old thing. It creates room for new methods down the line. I think that's totally fine. Having the idea that things are not completed yet, things can be added to. It's part of the issue with creating a rework and then populating every level with something new. You end up going into an RS3 situation where now they had to make mining and smithing go to level 110 because they literally can't add anything between 1 and 99 anymore because it's just chock full of stuff, So yeah.
Well, I think that's kind of one of the nice things about I think as a game, as a community, we would really benefit from this idea of let's take things that don't really make a lot of sense, move them, and just let what's there be empty. Just let there be space there so that later when something cool comes out, they have somewhere to put it. I mean, it's like the whole thing about Rancor being at like 90 something crafting, but like something else is at like something insane.
I think Rancor is 87, but the Torture's 98.
87, right?
It's so dumb.
Yeah. It's dumb stuff like that, right? And they can't undo that because they can't just quickly undo that because there's this whole stack that just you can't just fix. So anyway, that is to say that I think leaving space in a rework like this is something that I think people can really get on board with and get comfortable with and see the benefit of down the line when it's like, oh, hey, we want to add this new thing. Let's just like slot it into this spot that we have open in the thing. Because once again, name a method that like you're like, you just can't wait until you unlock that level 95 training method that increases your XP per hour. Like that's just not really a thing. That's not really a thing in RuneScape. Like above level 80 or so for most skills, you've unlocked the methods, and anything beyond that is reward space almost across the board. I mean, can you think of an example that I'm missing there?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think there's big unlocks at certain level points, but like they're not flooded. Like levels become more sparse. In fact, as you get higher in most skills, like skills drop off in value, and that's their own issue. That's they're separate conversation, but they tend to drop off in value when you get into the 90 range. They don't gain.
And I think a big part of that is because it's this awkwardness that exists in these other skills where it's so jam packed. Every single level has a thing. They can't even put something in that like looks like it makes sense. Like the Rancor, they just had to be like, you know what, guys, it doesn't make sense. Sorry, and it's like, well, that we should fix that.
Yeah, I think it's a giant missed opportunity not to set the precedent for adjusting things based on like literal just time, right? Like Torture at 98 made sense because the Fury's at 90. That's why they made the Torture at 98, because they couldn't make it at 99 because that feels weird because that's the skill cap. So they're like, okay, just do it at 98, makes sense, 10 level gap, that fine. But like conceptually speaking, the Fury being at 90 is the problem. But the Fury's at 90 because the Glory's at 80. Right. And conceptually, the Glory's at 80 because the Diamond Necklace or Amulet of Power is at 70. So the precedent there should have been, guys, totally. No one's engaging in this stuff the way it was the level bracketed. Everyone just skips it with ham chests, hunter skips, whatever it might be, buying the whatever, boosting. What if we just scooch everything down and make more room for the future? Because no one is doing this stuff with the pacing that it was originally intended. The Torture is no longer the end game amulet. We're making a new one. So now we have to get accustomed to the fact that the Torture will be 88 crafting, and this will be 94 crafting. And now or 93 crafting. And now we have room on the top end for a new thing on top of that without just scooching everything down with every time we add a new amulet, right? Like that to me is a much more healthier precedent for the game than just like creating totally incomprehensible jargon because of what we're really rubbing up on is just the issue of being a 26-year-old game and existing in a demographic that might feel a little bit rightfully conservative about making changes to the more foundational elements of it. And I think that sometimes, not all the time, not saying we should work everything out ever, but sometimes it's beneficial for the health of the game to just reconsider the existing kind of standard and wonder, why do we want this standard to exist? And if the answer to that is just because that's the way it was, I don't think that's good enough. I think it needs, because again, it goes back to that philosophy argument of like, it can't just be defaulting to a standard just because it's a standard. It needs to have a level of like value to it outside of that, right? The most nostalgic elements of old school are good elements of old school. The music is nostalgic because it's a banger. Everyone loves the soundtrack. We're not like keep the music the same and it's like a fucking like it's like the what is that? I don't remember the meme song, but it's just like the worst song ever, right? Like we love the music because it's good, because it's good music, you know? So like,
no, I mean, I always say like with nostalgia, what would be more nostalgic? Walking by the, you know, the mine in the Lumbridge Swamp and being like, oh, I remember when I used to mine Mithril and Adamant here when I was a kid. It was the fucking worst, and now I never do it, and no one does it ever. Oh well.
Yeah, like exactly.
Walking by and seeing players mining there because it actually makes sense to do in the game at a lower level, but hey, they're actually interacting with the game. Or like, I don't know, coal trucks in Sears Village. Like, what if that actually had a purpose? Like, you know, is that super fun? Like right now, no, but maybe it could be. Maybe it could be actually like you feel good when you're doing it. It's like, oh, I remember people used to do that. And look, people are doing it. Is that more nostalgic, or is just looking at it not being used and collecting dust more nostalgic?
Yeah, because exactly, because I feel like looking at it be just this barren wasteland is the opposite of nostalgia. It reminds you that this stuff is empty and dead. Like something being dead, I don't think is nostalgic to me. Like it being alive and thriving is what's nostalgic. And it's funny you bring up the Sears Village coal trucks, because I just recently did that, not in old school, in RuneScape 3, because they made it better. And I'm just like, wow, it's kind of crazy that this is a method that exists in old school that I didn't even know existed because it's so fucking irrelevant. And it's like, and I feel like for a RuneScape player, not just an old school player, just a RuneScape player that played it in 2006 that might know about the Sears Village coal trucks, they would get more nostalgia doing them in RuneScape 3 than they would in old school, because no one does them in old school, and they would never do them in old school. So like, I think the best kind of nostalgia is lived nostalgia, right? And finding a way to make it function. And I think that's, we always harp on this point, but it's so important because I always feel like the only counter to a lot of healthy changes is just defaulting to nostalgia. But like, that's not lived nostalgia. It's not nostalgic to never experience something ever again. And just the notion that it exists in and of itself doesn't feel nostalgic. It feels sad, right? It's sad. If Barrows,
the nostalgia is gatekeeping it from being actually a part of the game.
And that's why I always bring up my frustration with the way, the difference between the way people talk about PVM power creep and skilling power creep, because people love Barrows and don't want it to be power crept. In that it becomes irrelevant. It has been power crept, but it's still relevant. That's the cool thing about Barrows. They don't want it to become irrelevant, right? And I get that. I don't want that either. But like, why can't we have that mentality about skilling? Why is that only PVM? Because like, if Barrows was empty and totally irrelevant and no one would ever do it again, I doubt those players that wanted it to be relevant would be like, no, keep it that way. I don't ever want it to change. I just like that it exists.
Right.
Like, no, like you want it to be used. You want to go to Barrows in the early game. And like, and I wish that same mentality applied to skilling of like, you just want it to keep the same because that's how it was, even though no one does it, as opposed to you want it to be nostalgic and cool and done, you know? Like, and I think there's a way to thread that needle, right?
Totally.
When
now, before we go too far off, I want to finish this Reddit post, because it has a couple of good things in it that I think we harped on this idea that it's pitching adding these rocks that fill out the like 50 through 90 area that we both don't think is necessary. But the reason they add them, by the way, those rocks don't actually make armor themselves for the most part. What the pitch is that you use the things you mine with those and combine them with exactly what we were talking about before, breaking down, PVM gear pieces. So some they list out here are, well, it starts lower level. So it lists some granite items. I think maybe this is a zombie helm and like a granite. Whatever.
I think that's just granite armor. Too. I think that's just granite armor, right?
Okay, I don't know. I don't know why that looked weird to me. And then it goes to Barrows and sort of down the PVM list. And the idea is the pitching is you go and you mine these sort of secondary. It's almost like it's almost like secondaries, like herblore secondaries. You mine them, and then your sort of like herbs, if you will, from herblore are the broken down pieces of these PVM gear. So like barrows, you break down your Darax helm and you get some pieces and you use those with those secondaries of the same sort of tier. So barrows is like 70 smithing, 70 mining, and you combine those to create new items. And I guess I didn't really get this until we're looking at it right now. But I think that the point they're trying to get across here is replicating this idea that you go, you mine something, and then you bring it and you smith it into something else. So they're trying to keep mining and smithing working together all the way through the levels, which I think we both agree is unnecessary. I think it's cool if they kind of like weave and interact with each other beyond the core metals, but I don't think it's necessary to add in. I mean, if you're looking at what I'm looking at right now, I'm looking at this little thing that says alloy smelting, and it is just a sheet of new items of like rocks and stuff, colors and whatever. And I think that the average player would look at this and be like, I don't want to have to learn what all these do. I don't want to have to learn the value of them, the numbers they use with this and that, to add in a whole bunch of these things all at once, only for the goal of keeping mining and smithing working in tandem all the way through level 90. I don't think that's a necessary component of a rework. Do you?
No, I agree with that. I think that like, and that's why I've not thought about this a lot. It's actually just something I really started honing in on in this conversation. But like the idea that there is a switch in ethos at level 50, right? That's a tough sell. I think it's a tough sell for a developer, and that's why I wish like maybe Mind Rise is here to correct us or clarify, because like it's hard to be like this skill is one way until 50 and then different after. But why not, I guess. And I think that
sure.
So the reason I bring that up is because like that's the idea here, is where you stop mining into smelting into making armor, and now you add a bit more complexity to it. Conceptually, I think transitioning the skill in some ways to a more augmentation driven one, and I think that this rework also pitched ideas there too, of like adding features to existing things through the smithing skill and through the mining skill. That I like that idea. I want there to be more cross integration there. I like your idea of creating a kind of an interesting dry protection system around it too. I feel like both of these things can exist in tandem, right? Like you could create both of these features and create interesting ways to interface with them. I don't think it needs 9 different new types of ore as much as it just maybe needs like 3, right? Like a great example of this, and RS3 does this as well, but like the idea of coal not being the only secondary is a very intelligent kind of thing, because in RS3, you only need 1 coal for 1 adamant bar, or for 1 adamant bar. And then after level 40, it becomes luminite, and luminite becomes the coal alternative for rune. It's like it melts or burns hotter than coal, and that's the lore reason, I guess, right? So that's kind of an intelligent thing to do, because then you don't need influxes of coal, and most of your experience with the skill doesn't just become mining coal for hours to facilitate 8 pieces of coal for 1 piece of a different metal, right? Or 16 or whatever it might be. So that's the kind of stuff where I'm open to them adding like these like 2 or 3 new mining things at different brackets and stuff. And those are the things that can be used in tandem with the crushed or disassembled versions of existing items or dupes or whatever it might be, to facilitate like augmentation or dupe protection or dry protection, whatever it might be. And again, I know dry protection is a naughty word here, but like that would be the use case for smithing to me that fits. And if we really want to hone in on the idea of crafting your own armor outside of just from a dry protection standpoint, it could still be the fact that, like, for example, you, instead of just going to your player own house for a repair bench, you have to like repair it with your smithing skill. Like that could be kind of cool. Maybe it doesn't cost any gold there, because it already doesn't make any sense that you pay gold to your wooden repair bench at your player own house to repair an armor. What if you just had 70? Yeah, like what if you had 75 smithing and you could just fucking bang away at it and like maybe even repair it with like existing metals. Like maybe you need 5 rune bars and level 70 smithing to repair your barrow set to whatever. Like you could do that kind of stuff, and I think it works really well. Yap aside, that's just I think that the idea, and I want to touch on it just because it's so important to me, is that it's easy to dismiss like this transition to a different platform for the skill of just from crafting armor to augmenting it, that could feel really weird. But as long as we keep that idea that you are bringing something to an anvil and doing something with it at the anvil, I think as long as we keep that intact, it works, right? And I'm sorry, that was a very roundabout way of answering your question. I apologize for that. But essentially, just I agree with what you're saying there in regard to how it's not necessary to pad out mining levels to facilitate different smithing activities or different ways to do the same smithing activity, I guess. Rather, just 2 or 3 new mining things, if we even need those, just to like fill in some gaps with giving incentives to raise your mining level past 40, for coal, I guess. And then, focus on other stuff for smithing. I think that works for me. How do you feel about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Real quick, I want to add one thing, which is to the credit of this pitch that we're kind of saying we don't like this system they're pitching of these sort of like secondaries combined with these shards. What they've done here is literally just take the oath plate system of you mine the shale. I'm looking it up now because I'm this is my ignorance. You take the shale, you take the shards, you're doing mining and smithing together using mining things and PVM drops. That's what smithing is. So they've just taken that and they've just sort of stratified it to a bunch of different like tiers of item. So I don't think that is to say, I think that gives it a little more validity in my mind in that it exists. People seem to like that. I think the issue comes in just sort of blanket applying that to everything. I just don't think that we need to do that. I think there's also possibilities to either reuse existing items, or I don't know if we, like I said, I don't know if we need mining and smithing to be intrinsically tied to each other for all of these unlocks. I mean, already smithing has a bunch of unlocks. They don't have anything to do with mining, and I think that's okay. Like it has the unlock where you can make your DFS, and it's like not like you need to like go do level 90 mining dragon, shield parts or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like you just do it with smithing. I think that's fine. I honestly think that's okay. This idea of tying them together, I get why it's attractive. I don't think it's a necessary part of the skill. Personally, I just don't think that's. I think it's cool if they have, like I said, they weave in and out. I think the Infernal Shale is like a cool thing, but I don't think we need to use that as the template for literally everything else that exists in that realm.
That's exactly my perspective too, right? Like I say, like 2 or 3 additions to mining just to like not have the heavy burden of creating ore or bars just be on coal. That's the only real thing.
Just use things that exist.
Yeah, that's true.
Like
that's
what
true.
if it's Stardust and you just need a shit ton of it? You know what I'm saying? Like that. Why don't we could use that? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
or like you take your Stardust and you can like buy like star fragments from the shop, and those are like a coal replacement for certain things. Whatever. Those secondaries to me, I feel like there's things that exist in the game that we could just use that just sort of go with mining level. But what I've really personally settled on, or had an idea that I think would work really well to solve a lot of these issues we're talking about with this sort of gap past the starting levels, is truly just scaling. I mean, scaling is something that exists in the game in a lot of different places, but most notably combat, right? Like combat gets better. You using the same item gets better the more combat levels you have. And people seem to like that quite a bit. It basically makes every level feel productive for something. And you pitched this idea going all the way back to the idea of how do we sort of navigate the economic issue of a level squish. Your idea was you sort of have to build your item with more and more bars, which I think is fine. You could even take a much simpler route on that, which is literally just like it just costs more bars, period. Like no levels to it. You just like a rune plate body, 15 rune bars or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that's very ham-fisted, but it would do the same thing more or less for the economic situation. But
yeah, that's a good point.
This Reddit point that we are looking at right now pitches another idea on that, which is that let's see, I'm going to read this page because it's another take on it. So you pitched the mastery levels. I sort of simplified that into just increase bar costs, which by the way, when I first thought of a smithing fix, that was my first thought. Just increase the bars, just double the bars for everything. That just sort of, so you can keep the alch values. Anyway, I don't think that's the most elegant solution, but my point here is there's a lot of different takes on it. So this Reddit post's pitch is okay, I'm just gonna read it down. With a way for early game players to acquire ore outlined, that was their thing with the deposits, it now makes sense to keep the promise. All chromatic metals levels, chromatic metals, by the way, is bronze through rune. Level requirements should be rebalanced to their combat counterparts. So bronze is level 1 smithing, iron is level 3 smithing, steel is level 5, adamant 20, or mithril 20, adamant 30, runite 40. Below is the base and mastery level requirements for the chromatic levels. So those are the base levels, and the mastery levels are the ones that we have in the game currently. So the mastery for iron is 15. That's where you normally start it. The mastery for steel is 30. The mastery for mithril is 50, addy 70, and rune 85. Those are the base levels in the current game that you can smith those ores at. To keep existing XP rates unaffected, chromatic metals will have a mastery perk. Metals smithed at their base level will have actions performed every 15 ticks, up from 5. So if you're making a rune item at level 40 at their new base level, it takes 3 times as long. So that is another way to decrease the economic output, which is it just takes longer. Like you can make fewer of them per hour. Mastery of a metal will return their actions to their original speed. So basically, this sort of loose sense of scaling from their base level all the way up to their mastery level, which, just judging based on this pitch, I understand it's just like a flip that switch. So at 40, you're making your rune plate bodies 1 per 15 ticks. At level 85, a flip switches, and now you can make them every 5 ticks. Mastery of a chromatic metal is required to smelt it at the blast furnace. The rate that bars enter the game will be controlled by existing smithing requirements. Other unlisted activities like gold, locate, blah, 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 are unchanged. Okay. And then it goes on to show that it wants to tier out the unlocks, sort of starting at the level. So like mithril, for example, it starts at 20, you get a dagger, nails, and dart tips. At 21, you get axe, pickaxe, air tips. So it kind of just is bunching these things together, which it seems fine, I suppose. I don't really have a huge issue with that. I think it's maybe a little unnecessarily faithful to the original of sort of taking a thing and sort of stretching it across a bunch of levels. I think it's fine though. I don't have a big issue with that. So basically, the important part of this is that at lower levels, their pitch is you just do everything slower. People have read this and they like it. They think it's a pretty good way to sort of cap the low level output and give some value to the sort of the faithful original level at which you could do these things. What do you think about this?
Yeah, this is really interesting. This is interesting. I'm trying to like wrap my brain around how, I guess, my attitude towards this, because it is interesting. It's an interesting solution. It does in some ways solve for the problem of like endless alks at level 50 smithing by just making them much slower to obtain. So you could be getting 150k an hour instead of 700k or whatever an hour, right? Like that would be a way to balance it. I think that, so from like an economic standpoint, it's an interesting solution to go slower. I think the part where this I'm more mixed on, or at least it falls through for me a little bit, is actually the training method itself. And this is a whole different thing, right? We're talking about like, right now we were talking about systems and implementing systems that function from like a fantasy standpoint, from like a, progression standpoint, from a feeling standpoint. But this is without ever bringing up just the method of training the skill itself. That is the second portion, I guess, of the conversation, and making good training methods that feel good to do is important. And I think that this solution, while good from a economic standpoint, it's creative. I like all of that. It I think falls through as a training method. And I don't even know if
it's essentially a de-incentivization tactic. That's all this is. It's a disincentive to invest your time into this because it takes longer.
But I guess right, we don't have this guy with us or girl with us in this Discord, but like in their mind, do you still just train smithing via Giant's Foundry and Blast Furnace, and this is just like a one-off thing? Because like I guess my question would be like, well, you wouldn't train like the idea, their concept is at level 40 or 50 mining or whatever, it takes forever to get enough rune. You know, you get like 10 rune bars, whatever, an hour or whatever it might be. And maybe 50 rune bars an hour. So you'd have to spend, 100 hours just to get 10 levels for smithing, just banging away at your anvil for the materials. So it would be a really bad training method. So why would you ever do it at level 50 smithing? Like, why would you ever smith rune at level 50? It's expensive. It's slow. I guess it's AFK, but like, does that?
Yeah, it's not a method, right?
Yeah.
The goal of this is strictly to fulfill the promise of you can get your gear at this level. Period. End of discussion. It's not meant to be a method. And I think that the idea of it being a method is tricky. And I think that I'm not sure that. Okay, well, we'll continue what you're saying. But by the way, I did some quick math, and 15 bars is what you need to make a full set of rune armor for a plate body, kite shield, legs, full helm, and rune scimitar. 15 bars. So once you get to the level, it's in his pitch, it's going to take you like maybe 2 or 3 hours to gather the items and smith them into your full set of rune, which I think is nice. I think that's fine.
Yeah. I think that
okay, see what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't know. All I was saying is that, like, I think that as an incentive, it makes sense. But in that case, if you're already only getting 7 bars or 10, 20 bars an hour, or no, in his method, 3 bars, so 5 bars an hour at the appropriate level at which you smith and mine them, why do you even need the slow smithing speed? If you're, you know what I mean? It's not like you're smithing a lot of them anyway. I guess maybe if you're a main and you buy a lot of rune, but then again, if you're a main and buy a lot of rune, that's going to be millions and millions of gold for a really already not a great training method in the main game right now. The speed doesn't really change anything about that, right? Like, I guess it would slightly make it, well, no, it would, so actually the opposite, I think. The fact that it's slower makes it more AFK for people. So it would actually be incentivizing it at level 50 if you're like a bond berry and you love buying bonds at level 50 smithing and you want to, spend all that money on rune bars to make your smithing chill. What this does is in turn make a hyper AFK route to train smithing that's very expensive, gives a little bit less XP or 3 times less XP, but still really, 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 AFK. So I feel like the speed element, while an interesting idea, doesn't work when the core element is, or the core functionality that is pitched here is like, you only do this once anyway. At the level 40,
right.
Or level 50. So if it was a core training method, the idea of speeding up as you level makes perfect sense, and it would be cool, I think. And I think that's exactly how RS3 works right now anyway. So that would make sense. But if it's not meant to be a training method, it serves no function at all or purpose at all.
Yeah, I think that you make a good point, which is that it almost like this has this proposal has 2 sort of redundant gatekeeping like safeguards, one of which is the speed at which you gain these materials at low levels, and the other is the speed at which you craft them before their mastery level. And it seems a bit redundant, where it's like, okay, well, we're already sort of mathematically capping. Like, if I go back to this other image of how many ores you get per hour, from a deposit, right, which is his proposed new low-level way to get things. Let's say it's like adamant or whatever. The proposal is around 25 adamant ore per hour. Okay, well, in that case, we don't really need to smith them at a third of their regular speed because we're barely getting any of them per hour in the first place. So it seems a bit unnecessary in that way. I mean, 25 addy ore per hour. I mean, an addy plate body is like 11, 12K or something. That's like 60K GP an hour. So I feel like that's if you were just smithing in at the regular speed, and then it's a third of the smithing speed. Also, to be clear, again, if we're thinking about like sort of outputs, like economic outputs, a third of the smithing speed I guess that only matters for, like you're saying, if you're buying them and smithing them, but there's nothing really stopping you from doing that at end game right now. So it's not even really a threat to the economy. I guess it's a threat to early game money making, but it's not like Addy smithing or rune smithing is like this incredibly high value thing in the first place.
Yes,
So I guess my point is, it seems like there's redundancy there.
yeah, I think it's just in a very general, broad sense. You know that meme where it's the mental gymnastics meme where it's just like this girl on a mat and she just
Mhm.
walks and goes, "It's done," and then below her is like a dude like jumping over hoops and like flying over a burning car and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
You know, that's what it feels like is happening right now to justify keeping Rune at level 85 and keeping all these requirements the same. Is that we're creating these insanely like convoluted and unnecessarily complicated level gates when it could just be a one-time ripping of the band-aid and going, yeah, you know what, to facilitate the game working and having this skill have any use cases at all that aren't just like patchworked in over the course of the next 20 odd years, we have to tear down these core metals to make them something that are actually sought after. And it's going to be a small hit to player economy because now these items are worth less because you get them early. It's going to be a small hit to, but again, Rune is not a big trading factor in the game anyway, so it's not going to be the end of the world for the economy. It's going to be a small maybe hit to your nostalgia that you no longer unlock it at level 85, now you unlock it at level 50, but it's going to be a long-term health benefit that now this one of our 23-4 skills actually work. Like that's a, I think,
Right, right.
and that's me walking across the mat, you know, going, it's a one-time thing.
Right.
You walk across the mat, you get it done, and now we can actually create cool stuff with smithing that don't just feel like a you know, like you just plopping like some Play-Doh on top of a you know, pile of shit. Where as right now, for as much as I really commend this guy, I love the armor sets that he created, like the cool visual change. Like I think all that stuff is, it's a really creative solution, but I think it's a solution that feels convoluted to me personally, for as much as I love my convoluted solutions, just to facilitate a level of nostalgia that I don't think a lot of players that currently play the game actively even have that much. So I rather just default to a simpler, you know, thing. Does that, do you agree with that? Or do you feel like maybe I'm kind of like being dismissive here?
I think that the idea that we need to take an aggressive stance, I totally agree with.
Just a
it's your
one-time
point-
aggressive
it's the
stance,
point
you
that
know?
you're making about XP rates. Is that what you feel like is holding back a important thing, like a big change here?
Well, I think it's just really unnecessarily like bizarre and convoluted that like you unlock the ability to very slowly mine rune at level 50 or 40 and then you don't actually unlock the real way to mine it until level 85. Like that to me is really weird. And the same applies like to the smithing
Yeah.
portion where it's like you unlock the ability to smith it from the very slow mining method, but you don't really unlock the way to smith it until 80. And it's like, why? Like no one's gonna do this anyway at level 85. Why even have that? You know?
I totally get why. For me, I think I understand the purpose being all the goal is of creating this lower level is fulfilling the promise. It's just you can access it at this level. It's not going to make sense to do as something you spend a ton of time doing at that level. You might do it once, or you know, maybe you do a little bit more because it's just what you like to do. And then, but at a certain point, it will not be the most efficient thing. I think that's the kind of the goal, right? I think that's the goal of this pitch. Let's not make it the most efficient thing, but let's make it a viable thing for the goal of accessing these items. And then as you go, at a certain point, it gains more value once you have a higher smithing level. You can use it for other things like training or money making.
I think for me, it's like from maybe the rebalance accounts for this, but it doesn't seem like Rune would be a training method still. From what I see here, he listed like new mining methods that, you know, are better experience than Rune would ever be, unless it respawns really fast. But even then, it would only respawn really fast and be a viable method at 85 mining, but then it would be competing with the 37 to 90k method that is dark animica rocks. Like I feel what it feels like to me is just like when you unlock a thing, right? Like I unlocked a thing that's appropriate to my level. It would just make sense for that thing to also be something that you would kind of participate in more than once for a skill, right? Like you unlock like a great example of this is tree cutting, right? Where you unlock yews.
I was gonna say, I was gonna bring up wood cutting.
Yeah, they are very not good to do at 60 wood cutting. It takes forever to do yews, but they are a lot more AFK. And that's kind of like the trade-off there. And they become more viable the deeper you go, although arguably never super viable. The same applies to like redwoods and all that stuff, although redwoods are always viable after level 90. So here,
I agree. I think for me, wood cutting is kind of the golden, like, everything has a reason, a purpose. Some of them are more or less relevant than others, but you might do one over the other depending on how you're feeling, and they have scaled outputs.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I would say that woodcutting, I think, doesn't have the burden that smithing does with the alch values and all this stuff. But like, I guess ideally for me, it would be that smithing is trained through smithing. I know that sounded really patronizing. I didn't mean to. I'm being literal there. Like, I would love if smithing would be done just by doing smithing rather than doing, I think blast furnace is like a plague. Not to say I want should be removed or anything, but the fact that this is the best way to train smithing, even when like it's just. It feels so stupid. Like, it feels dumb that it's the best way to do smithing training, especially when you're not even making metals. You're making gold, which isn't even used in smithing. But like, it's really weird there.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love if there's any takeaway from the mining and smithing rework for me, is that if the takeaway is a retiering, even if it's not perfect, even if it's like 70 for rune or whatever, right? A retiering and a focusing on the training methods itself, because a lot of our conversation here was reasonably about like the pacing and the outputs of the skills. That's really important. But like, to me, one of the biggest faults of smithing, the reason why it needs this work isn't just because it has bad outputs, it's because the training methods don't align with the outputs, and the training methods don't even align with the skill itself. And like,
how do you feel about wood cutting and fletching? Like, chopping, let's say it's yew trees and you're fletching them.
I think that it's I don't know. I'm pretty mixed on it. I think that like I like the progression of cutting logs. I think the actual engagement of doing it is totally chill. I enjoy the process. I think I like that you can manipulate it and not. My biggest issues are the same issues I have with crafting, is that it should just be retiered to be more viable at the level you actually do it. Like fletching, I should say, should be retiered, not woodcutting. Woodcutting is fine. But the fletching should be retiered to fit the making needing 70 fletching for 70, 75, 80 fletching to make a magic short bow is a bit silly to me. It doesn't make any sense. And I would love that to be retiered. But like, the process of just making a lot of one item and just like, storing it and doing whatever, that's all fine. But it's very telling when they create a method like Veil Totems, which to me is my favorite method in the game. So I'm going to glaze it up. But like, that to me is like the quintessential like example of old design as opposed to new design, where the new design is just so much more thought out and balanced around the tiers that you're actually engaging with it in, where like, yeah, you can cut logs at 45 and fletch them into short bows, or you can do Veil Totems for triple the experience because you're doing it actively. That is much more fitting. So the reason I bring that up is I wish that if you unlock the level at which you unlock rune, right? It would be cool if that would be a training method now. Maybe not the fastest one. I'm not saying it needs to be the best thing ever. Like it doesn't need to be so bracketed, but like the idea to me that you unlock something in a skill to do it once for 2 hours and then you never do it again until at level 85. And then even at level 85, it's not an ideal or active method that anyone does because it's rune rocks at level 85 mining. Just that strikes me as you are creating the same problem you're solving, just in a different way. Or maybe I'm misunderstanding. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think the reason I was asking about woodcutting is because if woodcutting is fine the way that it is, then the issue with smithing is simply an issue of like pacing and of like the rate at which you're doing things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I would say woodcutting is fine as it is, but fletching isn't fine as it is. Or do you feel like fletching is fine as it is?
But level wise, yeah. But just in terms of the, because you're bringing up the idea of a method and the method of you you gather the resource and then you craft the resource. And it's very simple and it's very like low key. That smithing could be similar if it was literally just like similar rates and like you're saying, sort of similar reasons to do certain things at certain levels. So I've been kind of holding my ace in my sleeve with my personal pitch for this, that I feel like, I don't know, I'd be curious what you feel about it.
Please, yeah.
Which is that starting with mining, just make it like wood cutting. Okay, so basically just take the rocks and make them very similar to certain wood cutting trees. In that they are relatively slow to mine, but they're consistent. You can just sort of AFK them a little bit. And my pitch is that you roll for the ore, and if you miss the roll for the ore, then you roll for coal, and if you hit that roll, you get coal. And so you're sort of AFK mining both at the same time. Now, that's not the fastest way to mine coal. If you want a bunch of coal, you just go to the coal mines and mine a bunch of coal. But you're getting coal as you're going, and you're getting XP as you're going. So it doesn't make no sense to sit there mining a rune rock for like 20 minutes and get one rune. But if you're AFKing, you're getting XP, you're getting resources, you're getting the coal you need to make the bar, but you're just kind of just chilling at the rock and you're getting sort of medium low XP at a medium low intensity. That's step one. And then step two is with smithing. Instead of the things we mentioned so far are increase the bar cost, mastery, like sort of like tiering levels of the armor, or just increasing the time to craft it. My pitch instead is a fail rate, like cooking. Cooking, you get a lot of XP, but you can fail to craft the item, but the failure rate scales as you level up. And so my pitch is you start at a low success rate for different ores. Maybe, and that could tier up also, like, iron, steel, whatever. I don't think we need to be particularly punishing with that. We could put it at like a, whatever, like 75% success rate or something. And then mithril, maybe it's like 50, maybe Addy's 40, and rune's like 30 or something. And that way you are reserving the amount of, or whatever, you are reducing the amount of items coming out of it, but you get XP for a failed craft. You could do this in a couple of different ways. You could almost kind of do a little sneaky thing, like with the sort of with the takes longer thing. I kind of like that idea, where I've just had this idea for a long time. This kind of is one of the few things that I feel like I would be cool with in terms of not adding a lot of new items, would be like scrap that you get from failing a craft. So let's say you try to smith a rune plate body and you get some number, you fail it, and you get some number of scrap back in your inventory, which is like a stackable. Then you get like rune scraps, and then you could take those back to the furnace and turn those into bars, or maybe you could just smith them right at the anvil. And it's sort of like you get the same XP, but it gets split up into different chunks, and you maybe not even get the item from the scrap. And as you level up, your success rate on all of those goes up, and it does match the 100% at the level that you could originally smith it at. So higher smithing levels is valuable, and I think that'll be create an interesting situation where, like, yeah, early on you want to do rune, you only want to do it a little bit though, because you're losing resources, but you're getting XP at least. And then at a certain point, it becomes more viable because you actually get the XP out, or you get the GP out of it, and sort of it creates this much more interesting sort of fluxy system where, like, maybe you do rune right when you make it, but then you go back to mithril because it's at like a high enough rate that it's useful, and then you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because something I was originally going to caution is making it too similar to other skills creates the unfortunate byproduct of every skill feeling the same, or a lot of skills starting to feel the same. It's funny, the reason I even bring that up is because I think RS3 has this problem where it's funnily enough, it stemmed, I think, from the mining and smithing rework, where, just to quickly mention, there's a mechanic in mining I'm forgetting what it's called now, but essentially when you're mining a rock for an extended period of time, so you have a stamina mechanic when you're mining it in RS3, right? Where every hit against the rock, it fills up a bar, and after the bar is filled up, you get the ore. And higher level ore are harder to mine. You get better as you level up, and you get better pickaxes to do it faster. You also drain your stamina. With every hit, you lower your bar. And the way to raise your stamina up again is you re-click the ore just to facilitate that. You can either fully AFK it with low stamina, which takes forever to mine a single piece of ore, or you could re-click, one time and mine quicker. Occasionally, one of the ores glows essentially, and you click on that one and you get a big chunky hit on it and almost guarantee yourself an ore, right? That facilitates a more active gameplay method. Fine system, works for how it is. So many modern updates for skilling in the game use almost an identical system to this, to the point where a lot of skills start feeling in certain training methods like you're just doing mining. And that was my original concern with just make it like woodcutting, just make it like cooking, where I'm like, well, we already have woodcutting and cooking, let's make it like smithing. But with your, as you elaborated, I actually became more warm to the idea because there is a little bit more smithing, I guess, edge to it. Although I will always say that I think failure rates, especially high ones originally, get really annoying, and I think people hate those things like psychologically. You just hate the idea of consistently fucking something up to the point where, unfortunately, for as much as it sucks, that's, I think, why cooking is a very underused skill in general people's gameplay, right? That's like something to keep an eye out for. But the idea first of all, the idea of mining coal alongside other rocks is actually a really cool thing. I actually love that idea. And I think with that could come like an expansion of the coal bag where you could unlock that early on, or maybe that's how it connects with crafting. You can craft bigger coal bags to extend your trips at certain, areas. Like that would be kind of cool. So now you don't have to travel back and forth every single time you get an inventory full of coal, especially in this version where you would still need a fuckload of coal just to facilitate the smithing method. I love that idea. And I love the idea of it stemming from the same rock that you have a lower chance of actually getting the actual core metal out of, which kind of retains the value of the core metal too. I like that idea a lot. I think it's a great idea. The smithing angle of it, I like the idea of creating broken pieces that you can smelt down to regain a portion of your spent materials. And that could be a part of your, actual training method. I would take it a step further and say that it should be a good training method, where I think that the best, not the best, but arguably a way that old school RuneScape has balanced training methods is through sacrifice. So sacrificing a lot of output for better experience rates makes more sense than getting both the output and experience rates at a higher level. I don't know. I'm not fully sold on that idea. I think it's been done really badly, cough, cough, sepulcher, but that seems to be a way, whether I like it or not, that old school RuneScape, and just RuneScape, by the way, balances things. And the reason I say just RuneScape in general, not to keep yapping, is that smithing, funnily enough, in RuneScape 3 has a very similar concept called burial forge or burial smithing, where once you create a fully upgraded armor set, so the helmet, the chest, the legs, the gloves, and the boots, which you can create from smithing in RS3, and you fully upgrade them to their max, so for Rune would be like a +2, right? You can take them to a burial forge and sacrifice them, and then get a huge dump of experience because you've sacrificed the output entirely. And I think that's that would be an example of promoting sacrifice for better rates, or you could keep those items for the output of those items. So yeah, that's a long yap of saying that. Love the mining idea. I am cautious that the smithing idea might be received poorly because players despise the idea of constantly failing something. But I like it in concept. I guess we might think I really like the idea and concept of creating broken pieces that you smelt in. Yeah.
With the fail rate, I think the important thing there is that you still get something. You're still getting full XP for the fail. So you are getting the same XP rates regardless of your level, but you are getting lower GP output. The GP output is what is scaling with your level. So I agree that people could be a little down on that, but I think the idea, I think it would be, to me, a very elegant way of dealing with the systems, creating incentive to keep leveling up as you go. Like, for example, Iron Men make a lot of adamant bolts for their, ruby bolts and stuff. And they make rune bolts too. There's bolt smithing as a big part of Iron Man gameplay. And I think it would make sense to want to prolong that until a later point in the game when it would make perfect sense to actually be using those, right? Like, I don't think it needs to be like whatever 80 something that it is, but later on, if you only need to make one set of adamant armor, like, you'd be okay bringing maybe, instead of 15 bars, bringing 30, and you'd be like, yeah, I'll just, 30 bars you can get in like an hour or whatever. But if you're going to be making bolts, you don't want to just sit there and like fail your bolts over and over. Even if you're getting XP, you're not getting what you need. And so it makes more sense to wait to do that later when you have a greater chance of actually getting the output. So it's just an output, modifier, whereas the XP rates and the viability of training, so as you were saying, as a training method, is consistent through the levels.
Yeah, I think that actually that makes sense, and that actually makes sense to me. I like that idea, right? Because I just, as you emphasized there, the fact that it's a training method is the incentive there, and it becomes a training method and an output the deeper you go in the training method, which that fits. I'm curious on this very topic. Do you see the actual method of doing smithing remaining the same, or would you like to see more, I guess, depth added to the process of smithing itself?
I think that we could see a much more smithing focused like activity similar to Giant's Foundry, but that like takes bars and like has some sort of like, is a lot closer to actual smithing. But I feel like the things that we're talking about right now, with the first and foremost goal of squishing the levels and giving lower level players access to that armor without flooding the economy, I think we just leave that the same. That's my personal take. I think that there's room to grow. I love the idea. Another idea that I've had a bunch in terms of talking about changing that is like what we're talking about with sort of some sort of augmentation thing. And I think that could have different gameplay where you're like sitting there clicking at a different, at timings. Like, it could be like a tick based thing. It's like, oh, for mithril, it's like, you're clicking like one tick, two tick, one tick, two tick, something like that. I don't know. And like, if you do it right, you get a good. But I don't think that's important for what we're talking about right now.
The reason I bring it up is because in my big long conversation I had with Mod Rice months ago, we touched on skilling a little bit, and in tandem with our PVM conversation, because he's very passionate about skilling and potentially reworking smithing even. And something he outlined to me is the reason the PVM in old school has any depth is because a developer, who I think was actually, funnily enough, Mod Ash, had the idea of throwing something at a tile and making the player move out of that tile. And eventually that transformed into a shadow on the ground that you avoid. And eventually that transformed into every single intended PVM mechanic that we have today in RuneScape. And what Mod Rice told me...
Love that conversation, by the way.
Yeah.
That whole interview, if you guys haven't watched that, stop watching this one, go watch that one, then come back and finish one, because it's the best thing on the YouTube. Please continue.
It was an awesome conversation. And his whole like perspective on skilling, not to put words in his mouth, but I believe this is correct, is skilling needs a shadow on the ground. Like, it needs something like that to like be the backbone to create depth in the skilling systems. Because for as much as skilling in OSRS is one-to-one, easy to understand, for as much as it does have depth in some of its tick manipulation strategies, some of its solid sepulchers and Barracuda trials, the reason it patently can't ever have the kind of outputs that PVM does is because it doesn't have the backbone building it up to have all the different kind of methods of engagement that PVM does. It's still currently, I guess it currently lacks a broader identity. And I continued that by asking him, like, well, do you see that do you see like different kinds of skills having different versions of a shadow on the ground? A shadow on the ground for smithing, a shadow on the ground for mining, a shadow on the ground for crafting, herb lore, whatever. And he effectively kind of said, yeah, like that's to keep their identity, they need their own thing, but they need a thing. And that's why it's always like, for as much as I love conversations on output, I think that a skill and just any activity in RuneScape always needs an input as well. Not just like an item, but like a personal like way you do it, and depth there, or some level of like consideration there if it's not AFK, right? And even then if it is. So the reason I bring that up is because to me, smithing needs that, as does mining. In RuneScape 3, it has that little glowing rock or stamina system, right? Which I think works actually as a method, albeit not one that I want to see one-to-one in OSRS. I think smithing has its own method of training in RS3 with it, you heating up the bar and then beating it and then the bar. Like that stuff works really well. And the reason I bring that up with the Modrise conversation is because he's the one who created Infernal Shales and the way you create Oathplate. And I know you said you haven't done it. Maybe a couple other people here haven't. So Oathplate is very smithing forward. Like the fantasy of creating your Oathplate armor is very much the fantasy of doing smithing, right? Like you are folding metal, you're putting it in a forge. The forge has a bar, right, that fills up, and then when it's filled, you take it out, and then you have to like hit the metal on the forge or on the anvil with your hammer, like with every tick. Like you have to time it every tick to hit it perfectly. Like it has this whole method there that I think is really cool, and I think can be expanded and adapted to a version of the mining and smithing rework. Although it shouldn't be obviously the only way to train it. It just needs to be like, that could be like a backbone to it. You can create a low intensity method, a high intensity method. This could be the high intensity method of that. But like, it is always important to consider like what does the method itself look like? Because I think the output that we're discussing is determined purely on the amount of effort the method itself I guess asks for, right? Like the experience rates are determined by the method you're doing them with. The what you get out of it is determined by the method you're doing it with. So it's always just maybe not to have a perfect image of how it's going to work in your head, but I think it's important to consider like, okay, I envision this as a low intensity activity or a high intensity, high skill activity or blah, 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 So I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah.
Sorry
I feel like, no, what you're talking about is super relevant to this larger discussion, but I feel like for what we're talking about right now, it's like we're trying to fix we're trying to like triage like a gaping wound,
yeah.
And you're trying to like like build up the medical system to be able to do that better. And I really want to figure that out also. And I feel like honestly they are very synergistic, these two topics of like, let's go in and really fix things and really make them feel like they fit in the game, and then sort of expanding from there on methods that feel true to that, but create like variety in skill expression with smithing. I mean, right? That's kind of what we're talking about, right? Or with skilling.
Yeah, I think that for me, it's like I don't know if this is 100% true, but I would think that there needs to be an evolution of some kind with the method of smithing in any smithing rework. And the same applies to mining, but to a smaller extent, right? Like just making it more like wood cutting, I think it serves the purpose. But like, I think for smithing especially, it needs to have a kind of like push into a direction. So while I agree with you that our current conceptualization is output driven, just because it needs like more than it currently exists, but in a future where there is a pitch for a mining and smithing rework or reimagining or remaster, whatever you want to call it, it does need to include a changing of the paradigm for smithing. Like smithing does need to be operatively different than the way it works right now, because I think that whatever the solution is, if the end result is you just creating like 150,000 like chest pieces, it has failed. Like I think like any skill where the output is a completely irrelevant item is a skill that has as you pointed out, a fucking, a hole and it's bleeding and it's gouging blood and we need to triage, right? That's my big issue with Hunter, is that it's so many things in Hunter you just drop, And
dropping.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
just, it's awful. I hate that. So I feel like for smithing, not something we need to like iron out now, of course, but like it's just something that's always worth considering. Of like, is this version of smithing one where you're just like banging away for 4 ticks on a bar, or is it something a bit more? And if it's something a bit more, is it more active and therefore can warrant higher rates or better outputs? You know, things like that, right? Like that's yeah.
With that in mind, let's just get some crazy ideas out there just to see what people vibe with or what they don't. Since we've really kind of talked through a ton of different angles on this idea of a rebalance. So let's just say in this situation, a rebalance is happening and you've squished these levels down to like 1 through 50. And that's just in the game now. So my initial thought is just take classic smithing of just those of the items, pure and simple, just let that be. You smack an anvil. But to get a little more kooky, let's talk about a augmentation system. I've talked about this a bunch in DMs. That could be a system with actual moment-to-moment gameplay, skill expression, and I love this idea of bringing in, let's say you got a rune plate body, right? This is the best item you can smith with all of your normal, just regular smacking and anvil smithing, and you want to like buff it up, right? So you've got a bunch of rune bars in your inventory, and you got some other items and stuff, and you use it on the anvil. And we could go so many different directions with this, but it feels like there's so many ways you could just do it with like the Oathplate thing, where you're just like, it's a one tick clicking thing, you're clicking it, boom, boom, boom. What I love about that is you can do it at regular anvils, so you don't have to like create a new space out in the game where you have to go do this. I think it makes it a little more accessible. You could have it do a bunch of other things. Like I for some reason I love this idea of like I don't even know what this game is called, but it's like the thing is moving across the screen and you have to click it at a certain time, like right as the bar crosses the like
like a rhythm game, like Guitar Hero.
Like a rhythm game. Yeah, like a Guitar Hero thing. That sounds fun to me. Like that could be cool, right? Like that it could be, you could take this in so many directions that are, timing based. I mean, those are sort of my ideas, that they're timing based. I don't know, was that sort of what you picture also?
Yeah, it's funny. I picture it in the opposite, where the core of smithing is timing based, while these upgrades can be a bit more like you just create an item and then attach it. But either way, I'm open to the idea. I love the idea because I think that creating some depth to the method itself is great, and also creating some really fun, flavorful items that might not have the craziest meta changing uses ever, but should or ought have some cool uses, for especially in the early and mid game where there's more space for some meta shifting or even just some expansion on the meta,
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea. Something I've always felt passionate about is you described a scenario where you smith, like, your bank ends up being like 20 million rune plate bodies or whatever. And that is a fail point. And I agree. I feel like they've done something interesting with like Veil Totems, where you have all this banked fletching stuff that you would never have any use for. Like, you're never going to use like, 27,000 longbows unstrung. And now all of a sudden you can take him to the thing and you have this use for it, which is cool. And then Giant's Foundry is kind of like that, but it doesn't let you do this, the traditional anvil smithing part of it, because you're losing out on value by doing that, and it's taking more time, which I think is kind of weird personally. I don't know why that's how that works. But anyway, I have this fantasy idea where you take the things you've smithed and you bring them back to the anvil, and you are doing these augmentations. And once again, I don't know why I'm so obsessed with like fail rates, but it feels like a way to actually use up items that are otherwise permanent for the goal of achieving something greater. So like, let's say you have like a rune longsword, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to smith it into something along the equivalent of like a dragon scimitar or something like that, through using smithing. And you take it to the thing, and you have to have rune bars in your inventory, you have to have dragon bones in your inventory, you have to have rubies in your inventory, and you go to it and you do this like tick-based thing where it's like you have to click it at the right time, you're like reacting to stuff, and if you do it well, you increase your chance of that succeeding, and if you do it poorly, you decrease your chance of it succeeding, and you might destroy the thing and all the things you put into it. And so you have this way of actually going through the items you've created on the way to something greater. And obviously a Dragon Scimitar out of a Rune Longsword is not a super exciting upgrade, but that's just an example. You could do a lot of other things. I love the idea of it being maybe something with like niche utility. Like you have a Rune Longsword that turns into a like you can imbue it with an element, and all of a sudden it benefits from elemental weaknesses. And so you're using like runes, and you're using maybe rune talismans, things that you go out into the world you end up collecting but you don't really care about. Suddenly you have an item sync for them, and you're like investing in an item.
Yeah, that's always been my take on investing an item, personalizing an item, creating like your own crafted thing, and to not flood like the game with different alternatives. Maybe these become untradeable, and you can like remove those to make them tradable, like just for simplicity's sake. But
no, I think that them being untradeable I've always had in my mind, and maybe that's just me being Iron Man brained, but the idea that you can smiths like it, that makes smithing the reward itself. It's like construction at that point. You level up smithing so that you can then do these things, right? Like, and now you have this item that you were able to craft that someone without smithing couldn't do.
No, that's exactly like my perspective too. And to me, in the weirdest way ever, I view it like herb lore. Like that's my gold standard for a skill that cross pollinates into like 15 other skills in the game and influences them in cool ways, influences your gameplay in cool ways. And also what's cool about herb lore is that it reintegrates and creates gameplay opportunities, as well as uses materials found in the game generally, right? Like for herb lore, it's not just a farming connection, because you don't just farm all the herb lore ingredients. In fact, the tertiary or secondaries are all obtained across the world from a whole variety of different things, from bossing with red spider's eggs to farming the snape grass to, picking stuff up from the ground, like with blue dragon scales. Like there's so many different outlets to or doing agility for stamina pots. Like there's so many different outlets for getting herb lore resources, and it just influences so many different things. And I think smithing similarly has that opportunity because it's a fantasy game, and having different materials influence what you create feels very evocative of fantasy, right? Like how many fantasy games are you taking 2 bars to a forge and creating the best item in the game? How many of them are you, getting 20 different items that have all these different purposes and then combining them into some masterwork thing? Like that to me very much feels more fantasy. And when I was thinking of skills that could connect with smithing, like, I mean, you have obviously mining, right? You have farming, right? For hemp, flax, and cotton, things that were added recently with the scaling update that don't really have that many use cases right now, except flax, I guess. So hemp and cotton could create things, right? As like a secondary ingredient to add things to your armor, like padding and things like that. Crafting can be used to create and craft those items into things, right? Runecraft, as you pointed out, for like imbuement that synergizes with magic. Slayer for like unique items from, as we mentioned earlier, like early level Slayer creatures that otherwise have nothing. Granite plating for granite armor that is otherwise only obtained from as a rare drop from trolls that no one does, or from barbarian assault that no one buys. Thieving for unique QOL items, herb lore for different oils that you can coat your weapon with, prayer for, I don't know, cool stuff. Like I think I even showed this idea to you. I had this idea of like creating scripture that you can attach to your armor for prayer bonus, like a crusader would, that just sounds badass. But things like that, like there's so many different opportunities there.
I love that. I mean, I would love to have rune armor that has like competitive prayer bonus to like proselyte, because then I'm just thinking about me and my shitty Iron Man. I would probably like take my rune armor with my medium high prayer bonus, like more than like Verax, for example, maybe a little less than proselyte. And I would just, because but you're working hard to get it, like it's harder to get than proselyte, so it's okay if it's like a little, it's similar power. And I would like go sit at like whatever
prayer, like, or whatever Slayer task that I was doing that I would normally like just do something kind of lazy at or whatever. I just like turn on like proselyte and like pray melee. Instead, I have like decent defense, and so I'm gonna turn on like piety, and all of a sudden I'm just tanking it really hard instead of just like AFKing with pray melee. Like I could see myself using those things in the game right now. Some of these things.
Yeah,
I feel like
like
for me
oh, I'm sorry.
some of the things you're talking about, like a lot of those are no. You're kind of back and forth in terms of like whether these things are things that are inputs to smithing versus smithing outputs that do something with those skills. Actually, maybe that's mostly inputs. I feel like for me, when I think of smithing inputs, sort of like my default ones are obviously mining, like we said, but then Slayer is a big one.
Mhm.
Kind of keeping my vision for smithing being closely tied to like a very much a cousin to PVM. Like you're gaining these you get like a Turoth Fang or something, and you can attach it to like a rune kite shield. Now it's like we were saying, like spiked kite shield that like has a little bit of like reflect damage or something, or like you get like a you're getting these things. Also, like I mentioned, like bones is like a PVM thing. You gather bones by killing whatever dragons. And yeah, I feel like it would be, you mentioned a ton of things, which obviously all of which could be extremely cool. For me, the lowest hanging fruit are things that are near to PVM / the use case of smithing. You make things to fight things. So having things you fight feed back into it feels like, like just default synergistic.
Yeah, I think it's very like a one-to-one thing, right? Like it doesn't need to be some like crazy complex new system. It could just be like cool items you get as you progress through something, right? Like the reason I always harp on Slayer here is because Slayer is an empty skill until level 75. Like genuinely, like it is such a frankly horrendous skill to train until level 75, because that's at 75 is when you get the first creature that actually gives you something. For 75 levels, it is just barren. It's a barren wasteland of obnoxious monsters that require obnoxious ways to kill them for no reason. And I feel like by creating smithing synergies, which again we talked about how up through level 50 is where like you can really use that evocative fantasy smith kind of experience. You could really reinvigorate Slayer as a result of that, right? Like I know Jagex had like ideas for adding early game Slayer items, and a lot of people didn't enjoy that, or at least voted against it. Or I don't think there even was a vote. I think people just kind of didn't respond super positively, so Jagex scrapped it. But like
you're not talking about the recent ones, right?
No. This was like a year or two ago, where like
okay,
there was I remember
because they just recently also introduced this at pitch.
Yeah, they added like elemental damage necklaces, which are great. I love that, because I funnily enough, I think we talked about that, or I pitched an idea similar to Mod Rice in that one podcast. But I think I remember like 2 years ago there was the idea of like a bug basher, where it's like a mace that does more damage to bugs and could be really good at the Nilo room in TOB, which is kind of fun. And for me, it's like people that I guess didn't enjoy it because, oh, why do I have to kill cave bugs or whatever? But now imagine if it connected with smithing, where instead of just dropping a mace dropping from a bug, it's like an items that you can aggregate and build around like a mace, like an adamant mace, or a rune mace. And now suddenly those things have some value there. Like things like that to me are just screaming for something more in the game. And like, I don't think they're complicated. Everything that we're saying here is a one-to-one thing, right? Like it's just get an item, build an item. Like it's no more difficult than creating the Ratbane weapons on Scurious. They just have more use cases than Ratbane, which I think gives them even more reason to exist. Like things like making.
Now let me throw one more thing out there.
Yeah, please go.
Just and you can finish what you wanted to say right there, though.
No, I was going to say is like Runecraft, right? Like needs that desperately for the first like 77 levels, right? Yeah.
So what I was going to throw out is one of the things that, and I think this is, personally, I don't even know how I feel about this, but it's something that doesn't get brought up enough, in my opinion, when we talk about skilling, which is, this is a much bigger topic, so I'll keep it short, but like combat on its surface is just as boring / sort of like lacking in depth as regular skilling. It's very simple. You click on something, eventually an output happens. Very similar. What makes combat fun though is all of the potential, the optional inputs. Like you get to do a lot of the work up front. I'm talking about obviously not like bosses, but like, Slayer and, more simple bosses. Like a lot of that, there is fun to be had in trying to like figure out gears that you want to bring, and maybe it incentivizes you to go do something out in the game, and then you feel better. You feel like proud of yourself for going out and getting the the dual Mako Weedle so that you can like absolutely obliterate gargoyles for Slayer, or like there are these things. There are tons of options as inputs, but skilling does not have options for inputs. It has most of them have a linear tier of tool. You got your axes and your pickaxes, and then you've got your outfit, which is also just a linear upgrade. Like there's no options there. You're not like, oh, do I want the smith's outfit or the other smithing outfit? Like there's nothing to think about. You just either have it or you don't. And so that's a question I'm always wondering is, do we want to explore more inputs for smithing? Like let's say let's say we have this this like smithing augmentation little mini game thing that we've got going on where you can bring certain items there, and there's some level of skill expression where you're doing like either ticks or there's different things to it. Well, but that's to say there is skill to it. What if there were options for inputs? So it's like, okay, you've got like a bunch of different hammers that you can get, and each hammer has a different thing. So it's like, oh, this one increases your tick window to 2 tick windows. So if you click it a little late, it's okay. Or, this one increases the, there's stats to it. And I will say, just zooming out a little bit more, combat has a bunch of numbers behind the scene that you can mess with that skilling doesn't. I feel like that's kind of where we end up in this Rice's shadow on the ground thing, is like, is there a way we could introduce more variables into skilling that then we could have more inputs and manage them and have it be more impactful? I think sailing did a good job of this. Sailing has a bunch of numbers behind the scenes.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think for me, it's, I know people might just react negatively because it's adding complexity to the game, or I don't want to say depth, because that sounds like just me assuming that people are dumb. That's not what I'm assuming. I know some people just don't like just overcomplicating things. I totally get that. But like I'm in favor of things that add like diversity in gameplay, or creating more use cases for things, like essentially just more paths. That's always, or not always, but oftentimes that's a great thing for a sandbox game. And having just even basic stats, it creates more opportunities. So the burden of a little bit more complexity for an ocean of potential depth in the future, right? Like imagine how lame RuneScape's combat would be with no stats, right? Like it would just be so stupid, like frankly. And
right.
And
it would literally just be wood cutting.
Exactly.
Right?
So there would
literally just be wood cutting,
and we don't need to add all of the amount there are. Just creating a couple kind of things to hone in on, like mining. Right? I brought up the RS3 example where the rocks have their associated hardness, and your pickaxe has its associated strength, and then you have a critical strike chance against certain rocks based on your mining level, and that's 3 stats. And it creates a deeper sense of progression when you're actually training the skill. You're seeing more crits, you're getting more rocks, you're getting more ore, and you're seeing the difficulty of a new rock that you just started mining. Like something they do that I think is kind of clever is that when you quote unquote get that new tier of rock unlocked, right? You go from adamant to rune, you don't have access to a rune pickaxe. So you go there to create your baseline gear, right? Your baseline rune pickaxe by mining rune with an adamant axe, and it is kind of slow. Like you're like, God damn, this is miserable. But then you get like a couple pieces of rune, you get a couple pieces of coal or whatever, and then you create those bars. You smith, a nice rune pickaxe for yourself, and you go back, and it feels great. You're like, you're killing it, right? And that progression there is very tangible. I think that's as a result of the way they've incrementalized, if that's a word, the actual process of mining, where you don't just have one roll for a thing, you incrementally increase a bar to get a thing. And as a result, you can increase that bar faster or slower based on the kind of skill you have in that skill, right? Like the materials, whatever. And it gets crazier with like nuttier, the game has a more in-depth skill progression system because it has skilling specific items on top of just general tools, which creates more depth. But that alone, the idea of having just a couple stats there creates a deeper feeling of progression. And I think that to me is it's not, I'm not saying it needs to exist in OSRS, but it's worth considering. Like, would that make the process of mining a little bit more fun to itemize around? Maybe certain rocks, require certain kinds of tools. Like, that'd be kind of cool. Like, what if there was a rock that didn't just require a pickaxe, that required a chisel as well as a pickaxe, because you have to like, chisel out something from it, sometimes, like things like that, just little alterations like that give room to, now what if there's a chisel you can hold in your hand so it saves an inventory slot? What if there's a chisel that does the actions faster, kind of like the fletching knife from Veil?
There's like a pickaxe that like has a chisel built into it.
Yeah, like on the other end, right? Like you have a pickaxe with one end being the pick and the other end being a chisel. Like things like that could be kind of cool, right? Like you could create all kinds of unique synergies there just by opening up the doors, the floodgates, just a little bit, just a little bit of water. Doesn't need to be.
Yeah, I mean, the thing for me, this whole conversation, you're using the word deeper progression being the key word there, which is the correct word, but I think the word that I would use to talk about what I see as lacking is decisions.
Yeah,
because there is progression through the tools. It's not deep like we're saying, but there's never ever a decision. Should you use a rune or an addy pickaxe? You should use rune. Should you use a rune or a dragon pickaxe? You should use dragon. Always. There's maybe a small decision in terms of like infernal tools, because it's like, okay, there's a tiny bit of a trade-off there. But infernal tools don't seem super popular, so it's not, that's not a great example, I don't think. I think a cooler example would be either like, let's just take this mining change that we talk about at the end here, where you get coal most of the time, but you get the ore sometimes, and as you level up, you get more and more of the ore and less of the coal. There's two pickaxes I can immediately think of off the top of my head, one of which just increases the speed of mining in general. So you get more ore, you get more coal, and you get more of the ore. And so basically you're just getting more, but you're having to bank more often. Another one is you get less coal, but you get more of the ore itself. And so it's a little more AFK, but you end up with just the resource that you want. And all of a sudden you have to make a decision. You're like, oh, like, do I want this to be, do I want just more stuff and it is more like less AFK, or do I want to AFK a little bit and I get more of just the one ore that I'm looking for? Or you could have another one that goes deeper down into the skill expression route, which is it's like it got like that sort of critical hit built into it. It's a pickaxe with that built into it, where like the pickaxe glows and you can click it and it does like a little special attack thing. Like you have like a triggered special attack. I think that would be cool too. Or another one that increases the chance of finding gems by a lot. Like but the point that I'm making is these all sound like, power creep or whatever, like just better than another thing. But if they all exist in the same tier, you have to decide which one you want. And that is where the fun of PVM comes in, or, especially stuff like Slayer, simple PVM comes in, just like making decisions. You feel like you have agency. You want to get different things for different reasons. I think that would be a really easy way to go with diversifying the skilling experience.
100%. I am always in favor of having a kind of itemization in skilling. I think it is important to creating cool like investment in what you do. And as you point out, investment is created, in my opinion, through the ability to create decisions. Like what the coolest time to play OSRS is around the mid game, where you have like a smattering of items but no BIS items. So you look at like the wiki guide and you're carefully picking out the items that you do have to create a build that works for you based on the information that you have. And that to me is by far more interesting than the end game of OSRS, which is just running around with the same exact item you've had for the past 10 years. It's a mega rare. It's never going to change. Have fun, right? Like there is so much more excitement around building your own character.
And we could create that system in skilling that doesn't have that BIS, like endpoint where you're always having to decide what you want to do based on what you're doing and based on what your goals are. Like, it would make sense to have a gem finding pickaxe over the just go faster pickaxe if you want to get like some decent crafting XP on the side. Like, if that matters to you, you would do that, or like if you did something else and you had a ton of, or it's like, let's say you have time to AFK and you have time to focus. Well, you use the AFK time with the, just give me runite from this rock. I don't want any coal pickaxe. And then later you go to the, coal trucks, or maybe you're doing whatever, some PVM that gives you coal and you just got a bunch of coal, and that like works with what you want to do. Like, you have options and you have reasons to get each of the things for different use cases. And right now we just don't have that. Basically every skilling item is a direct upgrade. Like, there's no real reason to not use the new fletching knife. It's just an upgrade. Like, it doesn't take the place of the regular knife, which does something better than that knife. There's no decisions to be made there.
Yeah, no, I am 1,000,000% in agreement with you. I think that's exactly a place where smithing can exist too, right? Like, you can have crafting and smithing synergizing with one another, as both just elements of improving your PVM in some ways, but also I think like there's almost even more room for skilling related improvements. Like, I mean, this is, man, why not? Like, why not be able to create cooler versions of vials by having a high crafting level? Like, the idea here is not to upset
a deep vial that makes it a 4-dose.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's simple stuff like that. It doesn't need to become like something crazy. Like, it can just be small changes that noticeably impact your perspective or your perception of what you're doing. I think that's really all it takes. Like, I think that's why I'm kind of critical about like just incremental stat increases as like the method of power creep, because those are always the least noticeable ones, right? My favorite kinds of power creep are things like the light bearer ring, which increases the speed at which your spec regenerates, which opens up different ways to approach content with different kinds of weapons because now you're receiving a spec more often. Like, things like that are a lot more creative and interesting to think about. Yeah.
Right, that could be another very interesting place for skilling up, side grades. We have these really, really lame skilling tools, special attacks that just like give you like a really unnoticeable boost. And having we were talking about like one that gives you like an automatic mining of the rock. Like, you could really use, if there was a pickaxe that just had a spec that just auto mined the rock, you could do some really interesting stuff with that.
Yeah, you really could. Like, you could do some really cool stuff. Oh man, how
like
cool
some interesting weird like tick stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what if the spec, because it instantly mined a rock, it puts you immediately in a 4-tick cycle for tick manipulation, like stuff like that. Like, that's a really techie thing to say, but like that would be really fucking cool.
No,
I know,
that's real.
Really cool.
That's real. I think using like getting more like this document that we brought up earlier about skilling talks about embracing the tick timer and like using it in creative ways. I think there could be a pickaxe that like essentially has knife log built into it, but like you have to click the rock twice. You know what I'm saying? Like something like that, where it's just like the super high input thing. Like, anyway, there's a lot of options, but the thing that I'm saying, I feel like there are so many things in RuneScape where we add those things and it's an item in your inventory and it's a pair of gloves and it's a random thing here and that and this and that, but you don't have to make decisions between those things. You just get them, and you're just sort of getting. There's no decisions to be made if you just have them all. So that's my take on 100%,
skilling. 100% agree with that. I think like that creating choices and itemization, why, like the fact that those really don't exist in skills is, I think, a pretty big missed opportunity. And it doesn't need to power creep the skill itself, right? Like, all it needs to do is it just changes the output slightly or gives you new kinds of outputs or new methods of achieving an existing output. And that's all it really needs to do, right? Like, gem rocks are a great example of a completely ignored piece of content that would be cool. Like, gem rocks are a foundational element in RuneScape 3 because they don't deplete, so they're a really good way of training your crafting, right? That's like your main goal. Old school RuneScape has went into the molten glass arena for crafting training, which is totally fair, totally fine. But gem rocks now are utterly irrelevant other than for people searching for one specific gem or doing tick manipulation. What if there is a gem specific pickaxe that can help you achieve those kinds of outputs? Like things like that to me are begging to be expanded upon, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think also as we're saying this, like we said blacksmithing, smithing, and some of these other production skills would be a great place to be the source of these things, of these side grades, if there's some level of skill and effort put into getting them. Like I feel like if you're listening to this and you're a RuneScape player, you're like, okay, what new mini game am I gonna have to go to get the pickaxe that does whatever, or like the hammer that does whatever. Like, what if you could just smith them? What if you could just make them? Like, we could. I think that finding a way to make a smithed item or a crafted item feel like a meaningful reward for meaningful input, as opposed to you just bring some bars to Amble and you click on it and you get a thing, or like you bring your DFS there and your or whatever your visage and your thing and you just click it and it's like, oh, the text box says you work really hard and I have the sickest shield. It's like, okay, that's just, I didn't do anything. Like there's no skill to it. I just happen to get both things. If we can find a way to make the process of creating it feel more meaningful, like you were saying, we can put meaningful upgrades behind that. But I think it's gonna be kind of hard to do that without that.
Like there are so many like materials in this game that have functionally no uses right now. And it's something I'm very critical of in OSRS. And it's something that is like, these are the kinds of things that would just add something to them, right? Like, imagine you needed to go hunt dark kebbits for their fur to wrap the handle of a pickaxe to create a unique kind of pickaxe, right? Like you can create it normally like you would with smithing, but then you can just have a couple other like use cases for like these are all existing items. We don't need to flood the game with 100 different forestry items to make this function. We have the resources in the game right now. They're just not used for anything, frankly. So like, what if, you wrap them with hunter fur, you use a opal to like, decorate the whatever, and then you imbue it at an air altar once you're done with it. And now you have a gem mining pickaxe, like things like that to me, not only add flavor, they add use cases for different skills. They add, in some cases, not revolutionary, but like, very evocative use cases like imbuing or using a hunter fur that otherwise has literally no use in the entire game. Like, these are the kinds of things that, first of all, they're very RPG, right? Second of all, they feel very old school, right? Like, you are always collecting items in old school. You always are doing that. Like, I think creating the standard of just drop them is a very new thing that exists in RuneScape. Was never as common back in the ye old days. That is the case because a lot of stuff has been power crept. So instead of just raising the power ceiling, what if we just reintegrate them into a different thing, and now suddenly you're not just dropping every single kebbit fur or every single, hunter output or every single, in some cases, even mining output, frankly, right? Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question I have that has been rattling around in my mind with all of this, especially with the idea of crafted outputs that are actually useful, that aren't consumable, right? They're not potions, they're not ammo. I feel like this game really struggles with permanent crafted outputs, like, gear. It all basically just becomes GP. That's kind of the only thing we have for it right now. Or I guess Giant's Foundry and Veil Totem exist to like recycle that into XP. Mm-hmm. But what if we want them to have actual uses in the game? Would it be okay to have these things be, expendable, essentially? Is that something that it would, it's like, okay, if you want this dark kebbit fur to go on this thing, if you only need one of them, well, you're only going to get one dark kebbit fur, and then it's going to go back to being useless again.
Yeah, so what you're adding is kind of like a charge maybe element to it, where it like you need to
Yeah, right.
resupply it or need a certain amount of it. It could just be the failure state where you maybe like need a lot of dark habit fur. Like I think that that's very fair. I I I want to see how that can be balanced, right? Because I think one of the main reasons why infernal tools are never used is because no one wants to grind Cerberus for a $2 million or 2 million gold infernal stone to like recreate this stuff. Like that's really cringe. But when they're hunter supplies that you're already getting from training hunter, I think there's a lot more validity to
Right.
creating a charge element. It doesn't need to be overbearing. It doesn't need to be like you have to use one every 10 minutes, but like creating a very light charge element where essentially just like you just need the resources you'd use to create it, other than maybe the bars, because the bars already have their use cases, like the fur and the opal, and you just kind of reintegrate it and then you're chilling. Like things like that to me make sense. Yeah, like that I don't see an issue with that because I want to promote people to become hoarders, is what I'm saying. I want people to like feel that everything they're choosing not to pick up is a sacrifice that they're making rather than just a who the fuck cares, it's a grimy Guam kind of situation, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, uh, there is another route to take here, which is like the Minecraft route, right? Where it's like Minecraft's tools, which you need to use all the time, that actually are very, very similar to RuneScape's tool system, but they all break. You have to make new ones, and there are ways to change that depending on what tier of metal you use, or resource, I guess. And then there are enchantments also that make that even more flexible. Um, and I wonder if that could be like, imagine you, because when you sit there and you make 10,000 adamant bolts to turn into ruby bolts or whatever, you're not like, ah, I hate my life, I'm just gonna use these up and then they're gonna be gone, this sucks. Like, everyone's like, yeah, you shoot them and they go away.
Yeah.
And so if you made tools that consume themselves as they go, sort of being the balancing element is that they consume themselves as they go. And so making like 40 or 100 or 200 of them is like, you're like, yeah, I'm stocking up. I mean, it's like Herbla, right? It's not like, oh, God damn it, I have to make, another prayer potion. I already made one of these. Like, what I'm saying? Like, basically turning things into consumables that we conceive of as permanent, like pickaxes, sounds weird on the surface, but uh, would that just be fine? That
I
making a bunch of them would actually be like what you want. That would be like the sort of, you know, uh state of the middle of the skill, like the bulk of the skill is creating these things that you will most likely have a use for, that consume themselves.
I would say that like maybe this might be just my biases here, but like I feel like the core issue with like the perspective of Chargescape as an idea or a reality in the game sometimes is that the only place to really obtain those charges is by revisiting content that is otherwise completed. Like that to me is always very unsatisfying to do. Um, I feel like that makes sense why no one wants to go back to Zulrah after 1.5k KC because they ran out of charges on their Trident. I guess you could fish them, but it's kind of cringe, frankly, to do that. So like it, if you could just stock up off rip, and the ability to, and you could recharge it via just engaging in other training methods. You don't have to just revisit something that you otherwise completed. That to me kind of solves the problem a little bit with Chargescape. Like that
Yeah, I
that
mean,
it, it
when
makes sense.
things come from gathering resources in the first place, though, I feel like that's different than Zulrah.
Yeah, that's exactly
Where
what I
like,
mean, right? Because you're already doing the gathering
yeah,
thing. You're still doing herb runs, like potion or not. So it's like it doesn't feel
right,
like it's Chargescape. Potions don't feel like Chargescape. I think because
right, right, right.
it's such a binary thing with Zulrah, or such a binary thing. I mean, the Venator bow, or sorry, not Venator. Jesus, the Zaret bow. Like I might the bow, the AOE bow from Phantom Muspah. Jesus, my brain is fried. Whatever that is.
It is Venator, right?
Venator, yeah, it's Venator, right? Now Zared is the crossbow from Nex. So like that item, I mean, that you don't ever run out of charges in that, but like, you know, it's a binary source. You either mine it or you go right next to the boss or you go into the boss. Because the items that would be refilling these tools, these conceptual degrading tools, would be items that you are already doing via hunter rumors, hunter training, or rune crafting, whatever it might be. It won't feel like you have to go out of your way to revisit things for no benefit other than making more tools. You know what I mean? You just passively stock up on these things as you play the game. That kind of solves that problem, in my opinion. You know?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it would feel a lot better than like, oh, I have to go back and do this again. Yeah, I feel like that would make sense. And yeah, I don't know. This might be whole conversation might be way outside of the scope of what's even doable in the next like 1 to 3 years.
Yeah.
But it feels like if we are going to proceed with this game, this level of depth really should be added to skilling so that we can enjoy it in the same way that we enjoy PVM with just making decisions. I mean, that's all it is, just making decisions.
I think like the conversation serves two purposes to me, where on one hand, it's just showcasing that there's a lot of potential here for cool stuff. Like that alone, I think gets, even if you hate all of our ideas, like it's one of those things where you can come up with your own ideas that are even cooler. Just the fact that you are doing that is a positive element of the conversation that would otherwise not be existing if we're just doing 10 tier upgrades every time. The second benefit, as you pointed out, what is the idea that like right now the game is increasing in complexity on the top end, but the complexity on the bottom end, or even just on the whole other end, which is the skilling, is remaining the same, which creates a very disparate experience depending on the kind of content you do. And it creates a very, like, in my opinion, simplistic choice you make when you engage with the game. Do you skill, which is low input, low effort, or do you PVM, which is progressively high input, more higher and higher input and high effort? And to me, I don't think those two things need to always exist in separate things. That they can be individual choices you make depending on the kind of content you engage with. And I think like that would help the game in the long term feel more fleshed out, feel like seems kind of off topic, but I just really want to like this is why I hate the Rubium changes they made. I don't know if you kept up with those for sailing, where they released this thing you could tick manipulate it, or you could AFK it, and now they removed the tick manipulation, and now if you want to make these cannonballs for sailing, you literally have no choice but to not play the game. And that to me is like the opposite of the correct choice to do for game design for OSRS. Like if the only way I can achieve something is by not playing, it makes me not excited to play, right? It makes me not want to log in. It makes me only think about the game when I don't want to play it. But, I might as well just do this on another monitor while doing something else that I actually want to do.
That's a good point.
That's always why I am critical when the only output to obtain something is AFK or borderline AFK. I always like when there's multiple options. And the reason I think that's relevant for this conversation is that if we create skilling, if we introduce the precedent for skilling that is multifaceted, has multiple options, some AFK, some not, we are creating a platform for deeper and more rewarding engagement in that skill. Like we are creating a standard for the game where whenever you want a skill, that doesn't mean you have to play on the second monitor anymore if you don't want to. And it's not just tick manipulation, which some people hate. I think that is such an important part. And right now with skills, in my humble opinion, there's just not enough depth to the way you do them that isn't tick manipulation to facilitate that choice of active or inactive. And just saying add a mini game for every skill is not also a great solution either, because frankly, as cool as some mini games are, that they are disconnected from the game itself. They're instanced separate things.
Right.
So instead of just patchworking every solution into a mini game or an activity, why not integrate the solution into the skill itself and then expand on it with mini games down the line if you want to?
Absolutely.
That's I think hopefully I summarize that decently enough. Other than that, I mean, listen, okay, awesome conversation as always. I'm excited to continue it. If people listening just so they're aware, like we want to create a conversation about this stuff. I think you and I, Josh, are really passionate about this, and we want to we kind of want to create a conversation about just the perception of skilling in OSRS, which I think you might agree with me here has been maybe not necessarily damaged, but it hasn't lived up to its fullest potential, you know?
Hasn't grown with the game.
Exactly. That's a much better way to put it. It has not grown with the game. And we want to hopefully see that change in time. So once again, I mean, if you have anything else you want to say before I usher
Yeah,
us
I was
out
just
here.
want to like zoom back into the super narrow slice in which we have started this conversation in, which is smithing, and what, at least what sort of, for me, my perspective, what we could do tomorrow, like to get this ball rolling. And I kind of want to just recap some of the things that we
Mhm.
that we talked about. So I'm saying these so that if you're watching this video or listening, whatever, these are the things that we want to hear your take on, right? Because this is like if this was going to come to a poll, what would you say? You know, what are your thoughts on these things? So, you know, the things to preserve. I'm actually going to pull up this Reddit thread again and just kind of go back to their parameters because this is such a big element of it, and I feel like I wanted to add that. We were going to change smithing tomorrow, starting with the level squish. That's my we could tomorrow squish these levels and do it in a way that's not going to blow everything up. We're going to try to keep the alch prices. We're going to try to keep the level requirements for wearing the gear. This is from the Reddit post. Keep the general core mechanics of smithing. We're going to try to keep the item drops as they are. We're not trying to go the RS3 route. We're going to try to keep the ore and bar drops as they are. We're going to try not to add a whole shit ton of new items that, like, you know, just sort of overly complicate things. And we're going to try to keep we're going to try to make smithing into a training method that you actually have any interest in doing. It's not just a thing. It's not just, okay, you can make one set of gear, which is obviously a big, big goal, but it's also like, okay, you might actually engage in this and not just only ever do, like, you know, blast furnace, giant's foundry. So those are sort of like the parameters. I miss anything?
No, that's no, 100%.
And then the ideas that we had, we threw out some ideas for how to change mining. So there was the Reddit post with the deposits, and that those started a very low smithing mining output, and then they jump up or maybe scale up, I'm not sure, to their sort of current rates in game, or I guess rather that there's the other option of traditional rock mining. There is, we didn't even really say too much more about this, but the idea of the RS3 permanent rock approach, which that's sort of interesting, where, you know, you're just mining it. There's the one that I pitched with the coal approach, where you change rocks to function a lot more like wood cutting trees in terms of despawn timer, respawn timer, rate of gathering resources. But, you know, you're getting coal often with the actual ore less often, and that the amount that you actually get that ore that you're mining scales as your mining level increases. And then any mining things that I missed?
Nope, you're nailing it, honestly.
And then the smithing, I have a little list here. The smithing takes that we had was your pitch of tiering up gear, so investing more and more bars into a single piece of gear to offset that alch value cost, which is a very cool, very flavorful, and much, you know, really a great idea that I think comes at a high cost. So it's like a big swing idea. I hopefully I didn't sound like I was shutting it down too hard.
Mm-hmm.
My initial thought is I love a ton of it. But that's just one idea. Let us know in the comments if you'd like that, if you'd be down with that, or if it feels like too much. Then there was the sort of simpler version of that, which is just increase the bar cost, which that could also maybe scale potentially, or you just leave it bar cost increased. Then you've also got the Reddit post version, which is the increased time to smith. And then you had my version, which is a little more like cooking, which has a fail rate, but you still get XP for the fail rate. So the XP rates stay pretty much stable, but you as you level up, you get increased scaling output. And then also maybe something like I mentioned with getting scraps that come from the metals that you can sort of reprocess into this skill. So get your rune scraps, you go and make them back into bars and try again, type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Did I miss any of the core pitches?
Nope, makes sense. 100%.
And yeah, so I'm curious to hear people's thoughts on those things. Which do you feel like work? Maybe there's a combination that we haven't thought of that works really well together. Definitely leave that in the comments. Is there another idea? Because the thing is, I wanted to make it very clear that most of these are not my ideas. I've seen a lot of really great takes from people on how to fix different elements of this. We couldn't get to all of them, but surely people in the comments will have their own takes of how to fix it too. And I think that it's worth really taking them all, looking at them, and picking the best things out of each of them. I'm sure that my mining idea, which we both are sound like we're pretty into, I bet someone has an even better implementation of that is even more elegant, that I would like more than my own idea. So if you have it, drop it down in the comments so we can get this ball rolling, because we have so much to gain from this, both in the short term of, okay, people, smithing is not stupid anymore. New players can smith their gear. There's more diverse training methods. There's more nostalgia and actually going to a mine and mining the ores. But we also have so much to gain down the line of, okay, we create all this space and now we can add new things, like maybe some of the crazy ideas we're talking about, or maybe just something simple like the Barrows item breakdown, where you can create a little dry protection. Like there's so many things that it just starts with taking a big swing here with this level squish, and then we can go from there. Maybe the next step isn't even more smithing changes. Maybe the next step is a fletching level squish. I think that would go over really well. Or a crafting level squish. I can't say squish apparently, but yeah, that is my plea to the listeners to this podcast, is just let's rally around the idea that we all like the most and show Jagex that we really want this to happen.
Yeah, it's a great way to say it. Like, I think being open to change and even evolving elements of the game that haven't aged well is not the same thing as, reworking or evolving elements that have been working well, No, don't make changes for the sake of changes. Make changes where they would make the game better. And I think that's always been the goal, I think. I like you look at raids, whether you like, I'm not even a fan of raids, frankly, as a concept that much, but I think a lot of people who love them would say they've made the game so much better. And they've never existed before, ever. There's never been anything like raids in RuneScape, in the IP, until old school RuneScape integrated them in 2017 and RS3 did in like 2015. So like it's a swing and it worked. And there's been a lot of those in PVM. Every year, it seems like we get a swing in PVM, from a delve boss to contracts and whatever, that seem to go over well. And I feel like it's about time that we invest even a fraction of that into skilling, into a thing that I think is more synonymous with RuneScape than the PVM, frankly. So,
imagine if what you're saying, if every year we're getting a big PVM swing and a big skilling swing, and they add something or change something, and everyone's just like, whoa, yeah, like clapping, and they love it.
Yeah.
Like delve or whatever. It's like, imagine we had a delve level update to skilling every year for the past like 10 years. Imagine how the game would look. Imagine how much more fun skilling would be. Imagine how much more fun the game would be. Like, can you really picture that, being like, wow, there was something that they added and everyone loved it and it was sick. Like, we can have that. We just need to get bold.
Yeah, it's bold. It's boldness in quality, right? Like, we don't need to. I totally understand why people might like be afraid of these kinds of things because of like RS3, the looming specter of the EOC and all this kind of stuff. I totally get that, but like at a certain point, we have to call an egg an egg, right? Like, a bad update is a bad update. That's what it is, right? And there's been many of those in OSRS and many of those in RS3, but at a certain point, there's also good updates, and we can't just summarize the idea of being bold or innovative as just automatically bad because there are examples of it being bad, right? Especially in OSRS, where we have so many safeguards for creating another EOC tier game destruction, right? Like, there are so many safeguards. We go through like 9 different polls. We have polls of polls of polls, you know? Like, how many times did we need a sailing poll? How many times did we need updates or polls or announcements of polls for sailing updates that never ended up even coming out? Like this year happened like twice, 2 or 3 times. Like it's like we have so many safeguards here. We don't need to like feel like we could wake up one day and the game becomes, you know, a travesty, right? Like, introduce the idea, engage in the idea, and eventually, hopefully, you know, the best parts of it make their way into the game, you know?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, again, thank you so much for joining, Josh. It's always been a pleasure. And obviously I'll link
You
all your
didn't
stuff
thank
in the
me.
description.
We're on the same page.
Yeah, we're on the same page. Thank you everybody for listening then too. And I'll hopefully see you on down the line, maybe to continue this conversation or have a fletching conversation when the smithing rework ends up happening, you know? All right.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. Yeah, I really hope that our plans for where this conversation is going next happen. I think that would be really fun.
Oh my God. The viewers don't even know. The viewers don't even know.
Don't even know.
Yeah.
Don't even know.
Hopefully it'll be awesome.